This episode is brought to you by Arc'teryx. When Jordan Cannon, a young climber infatuated with climbing history, meets climbing legend Mark Hudon, a Yosemite big wall free climbing pioneer, they form an unlikely partnership around a common goal. Jordan wants to free climb the Freerider on El Capitan in a day, and Mark hopes to free the route in as many days as it takes and accomplish his lifelong goal of free climbing El Capitan. Follow their story in Free as Can Be, a short climbing film brought to you by Arc'teryx. I watched the film over the summer. It's 31 minutes long. It's so well done. It's a story of climbing partnership and adventure. And if you love this podcast, especially if you love the episodes from Yosemite climbers and stories from the side of El Cap, then I know you'll love the film. So check it out. Head over to YouTube and search for Arc'teryx Free as Can Be, or use the direct link right there in your podcast app to watch the full 31-minute film for free. Once again, you can head to YouTube and search for Arc'teryx Free as Can Be, or use the direct link right there in your podcast app to watch the full 31-minute film for free. Arc'teryx presents Free as Can Be, and we hope you enjoy the film. This episode is also brought to you by PhysiVantage. I have been taking the PhysiVantage Supercharged Collagen every day for months, probably close to a year now, and I love knowing that my tendons and my ligaments, the soft tissues in my fingers, are getting all the building blocks they need to get stronger. Supercharged Collagen is a research-based, athlete-proven supplement that supports collagen synthesis in connective tissues and the force transfer matrix of muscle. What the hell does all that mean? Well, to me, it means that if you want stronger fingers, you should be supplementing with collagen. I personally take some collagen in the morning with my breakfast, and then I take a scoop of it an hour before my finger training if I'm doing some heavy finger training that day, or if I'm climbing on the moon board or something really high intensity on my fingers. I still have a long way to go in my own finger strength journey, but it's coming along, and I definitely think the extra collagen is helping. If you would like to feel the PhysiVantage, head over to PhysiVantage.com and use code NUGGET15 at checkout to save 15% off your next order. That's PhysiVantage.com. Use code NUGGET15 at checkout to save 15% off your order. And finally, this episode is brought to you by Crimpd. This is the best app I have seen when it comes to self-coached training for rock climbing. If you are a self-coached climber, or you're interested in training for the very first time after listening to all of my amazing episodes on this podcast, I'm joking. Crimpd was designed to give you a professional training experience right there in your pocket. All of the workouts in the app are crafted by world-class climbers and coaches, Tom Randall, who has been on the podcast, and his partner, Ollie Torr, who is coming up on the podcast, hopefully this fall, of Lattice Training. You can find workouts that are tailored to help you improve your endurance, power endurance, finger strength, conditioning, you name it. Whatever physical traits you want to work on to get better at climbing, it's in the app. With Crimpd, training on your own has never been easier. So check out Crimpd. Go to crimpd.com. That's CRIMPD.com to get started and download the Crimpd app for free. That's crimpd.com, or find the Crimpd app in the App Store to get started with your training. Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Nugget Climbing Podcast. This is your host, Stephen Dimmitt, and my guest today is Aidan Roberts. Aidan is a 23-year-old from the UK. I believe he's 23. He might be 24, depending on when his birthday is. I first learned about Aidan a few years ago when he came to Colorado and had an absolutely incredible trip. He showed up in Rocky Mountain National Park and put down a bunch of boulders, V12 and harder, really quickly, and really made an impression. That's when he first came on my radar. And in the last couple of years, Aidan has established himself as one of the strongest boulderers in the world. And I was really excited to talk to him. Aidan's a really thoughtful guy. He's a really sweet guy. He's really easy to talk to and super friendly. And he gives a lot of attention to his climbing and thinks a lot about how he climbs. That was the thing that stood out to me most from this interview. We covered many, many topics, including his training and preparation for the trip that he is currently on in Switzerland. We recorded this almost a month ago on October 5th. about a week before Aidan left on a trip for Switzerland to try a boulder called Alphane, a V17, put up by Shawn Raboutou. And spoiler alert, in case you haven't seen the news, Aidan sent the boulder about a week into his trip and became the first person to repeat an established V17 and only the fourth person in the world to climb V17. So congratulations to Aidan. Absolutely amazing. And again, just so that this is really clear to everybody listening, we recorded this before he left on his trip, but we did talk a lot about his preparation and his training for Alphane. He was in the final stages of getting ready to leave for his trip to try the boulder. So we talked a lot about that, and we covered a lot of other topics in this conversation. I loved it. I'll leave it at that. I'll let you guys discover the rest. Please enjoy this wide-ranging conversation with V17 climber Aidan Roberts.
Cause, no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it. Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like we do it.
Hey. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, not bad. Oh, nice to see your van.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, where was I last time? I was at the pavilion at the Rock Ranch. That's right. Yeah, you want the 2-second tour? This is pretty much it.
Yeah, go on. Oh, it's nice in there.
Thank you.
I like it. Oh, it's kind of the dream, huh? Working on the road from your van.
It is the dream. I mean, every day that I have the thoughtfulness to stop and reflect, I'm, of course we take everything for granted sometimes, but I'm super grateful for it. I love it so much.
Oh yeah. Oh, good on you. Yeah, no, it's and are you still sport climbing? You were doing some vert limestone when I was speaking to you.
Exactly. Yeah, vertical to slightly overhanging, pocketed and crimpy limestone in Ten Sleep, Wyoming, and we're here for about 10 more days. So probably.
Oh, nice.
I think we have like 6 or 7 more climbing days, hopefully. Weather looks great, so I'm hoping to take down my, I've got like a 13D, 8B project I've been trying, and then I'm trying to do some 512s and some other stuff. So we'll see. Fingers crossed. I'm going to go try it today.
Yeah. Are you getting the weather for it now? Because it was quite warm when I spoke to you.
Yeah, it's perfect now, but it's funny because Ten Sleep used to always be like the summer spot, like everyone would come here in July and August, and they still do. And August used to be like send temps and wearing puffies to belay, and now it's October is like the new season. It's crazy.
Yeah. Changing the time of the year, eh?
Yeah.
It's a bit, the seasons are shifting a little bit, but.
How are you?
Yeah, no, good. Yeah, I'm doing well, actually. Seasons changed here in the lakes as well. Definitely getting some classic autumnal lakes weather, which is often very wet.
Okay.
So not so cold yet, but a lot of rain.
Oh, great. Still warm and rainy. That's not ideal for bouldering, especially on the type of stuff you'd like to do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely cooled down a bit, but we're on the verge of micro flooding. So
oh, really?
It's quite we get a lot of rain in the lakes anyway. When autumn's good, it's amazing. We've had a couple of nice days, so always make the most of those. But it's I've been going well. I'm off to Switzerland next week actually, so been preparing for that, and it's been really fun.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm excited to dig into that later in the conversation. I'm curious, are you mixing in outdoor days when you can, or are you just like head down in training mode for this upcoming trip?
This upcoming trip has been slightly complicated. I was on a really good trajectory, and then had like a little athlete meet one weekend. I don't usually see so many people when I'm in my routine in the lakes, but I knew I had one sociable weekend and an athlete meet, and picked up some COVID, so which was my first round of it. And that stopped play a little bit, so I had a couple of weeks off, but it was quite good for my I had a little injury I was rehabbing anyway, which is now pretty much nipped in the bud.
Nice.
But now I'm in like my latter stages. I'm actually mostly inside, but the reason for that is I've got like a replica of Alphane, which is the thing I'm mostly going to try. And I set that up on my board a few weeks ago. And it's funny, on the actual climb, I had a similar progression as well. Like the first session, I think I did all the moves in the first session I tried on it, but like they were like the living end on that session. And then it was like the next session, like I could maybe link a couple of moves together. And every session, it just like very linearly improved, and I'd like make bigger and bigger links every session, and until I felt pretty close. And it was funny, I was like kind of not in the, I'd had like my finger injury, so I wasn't moving very well on my board, and I kind of like was rehabbing that at the same time, as well as trying to like train specifically for this thing. So it's a bit like juggling a bit of a balancing act between pushing it and staying reserved enough to recover. But anyway, after a bit of like forced rest and properly rehabbing it well, I had like a similar situation. Like I went from like just about doing the moves to making good links. So it's quite, hopefully, I was quite detailed about maybe I think there's definitely differences between the replica and the climb, in that I think that the actual climb is much steeper, but the holds are probably a bit better. Yeah, because it's steep, the holds have to be more positive. My board's 50, and I think the actual thing is probably, I'm not sure quite how steep it is, but maybe like 65. It's pretty steep.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's not exactly the same, but I made sure, like when I was actually on the climb, usually the way I approach a climb is like I'll rehearse it in isolation and end up with like a few like bullet points, which like I can like simplify all the little tricks that I've learned into like small like points for each move. Then that's like my way of like learning a moves. And so if I make sure that like the things that would usually fail, or like the little bullet points I have to remember for each move, if I make sure that those limiting factors when I fall off a move are targeted for each move that I set a replica of, then that's like kind of like a win for me. It feels like I'm hitting the right stimulus. So I had to play around a bit setting that up. But because I've got that, it now means that that's the most specific thing for me to train on, really. So I've just been mostly using that for the last couple of weeks.
Okay. Oh man, Aidan, I'm so excited about this. Yeah. That's already so interesting. I'm so excited to hear more about those bullet points, how you think about that, trying a project, and how you simplified things down so you can focus on them in your training. And yeah, I don't know. I've got so many bullet points on my outline. I'm really excited for this conversation. And I had a question for you before we dive into just the conversation and letting it roll. I'm already recording, and we just rolled right in as I knew we would, because you're so easy to talk to. But people are very, very interested in you. I like to... so I have Patreon. I have a bunch of patrons who support the podcast, and I always... whenever I remember to, and when it's not a super last minute conversation, I reach out to my patrons and say, here's who's coming up. Here's a little bit of information about this person. Let me know if you have questions for them, and I either consider that in the way I shape my own outline, or I just ask their questions outright. And I don't think I've ever gotten this many questions for somebody, ever. Like, not even close. I got like 24 questions for you.
Really?
An overwhelming number of questions. People are very interested in this guy from the UK, Aidan Roberts, and who in his amazing crimp strength. And I wonder, if we could do this the way that I did an interview with Ron Kauk, where I just stick to the outline. We just have whatever conversation we have, and then maybe you and I can do a follow up where we just do like a listener Q&A and just tackle a bunch of them. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, no, that works well for me. I'm almost quite surprised by that. I guess like maybe I'm especially secretive in but I feel like,
who is this guy?
On the scale of climbers you talk to, I'm probably pretty I feel like I'm probably quite small fish to in terms of like influence over the climbing community.
I don't know. I mean, it is that perfect balance maybe where you're climbing at like an absolute top of the world, sort of world-class level, and also there's not that much information about you, so people are fascinated, I think. And you've also, we've teased you in other conversations, like I talked to Dan Varian, and we talked about you a little bit, and I talked to Tom Herbert, and we talked kind of about you a little bit. So you've just, you've without even meaning to, you've kind of created this allure, I think. But okay, perfect. So we're 5 minutes into an interview, and we've already got the next one booked. So that's great.
Sweet. Yeah. Let's go for that. Yeah.
No, it's just on me to not botch this one, so you actually want to come back.
No, I'm all game. I'm looking forward to all those questions.
Nice. Well, I'll give a little context about Alphane, since you already mentioned that. I actually watched the film Alphane this morning. I hadn't gotten around to watching it yet. And the film Alphane, it's a group of guys in Switzerland bouldering. And the name of the film is named after a specific boulder problem. That's the feature of the film. Shawn Raboutou does the first ascent of this V17 called Alphane, this amazing looking long, is it granite? It looks like granite to me.
Yeah. Most of that Ticino area is granite.
Yeah, it just like absolutely stunning, and it's this super long. Shawn breaks it down as either like V15 into a V16 without a rest, or a V14 into a 15. He's not really sure, but certainly one of the hardest boulder problems in the world. Top 3 for sure that's been done. Maybe even the hardest. So you were in that video, you were featured, and I kept catching little snippets of you, which was fun. And you and I talked a week ago, and we talked about your training for that boulder. So I would love to dive into more of that in a second, but it was really funny. So that's about a 45-minute feature film. It's amazing. It's beautiful. It's really well edited. It's super fun to watch. It's got some hard music behind it. Like, it's got hip hop and rap. And I just was like watching it, just like foaming at the mouth, just like, yes, I want to go bouldering. And I finished that. And I think the first time I was introduced to you, a friend told me about your trip to Rocky Mountain National Park back in like 2018 or 19. And
2019.
19, okay. And there's this little film that came out, it's like 6 minutes long, that came out on the Mellow Climbing channel. That's where the Alphane film is as well, called Aidan Roberts Crushing in Colorado. And I'd watched that a few years ago before I started the podcast, and I just rewatched that this morning as well after Alphane. And it was, the juxtaposition of those two films was really funny because, it's these dudes crushing in Switzerland and to hip hop and rap and stuff. And then it's this 6 minute film of Aidan Roberts, like just absolutely smashing a bunch of boulders like V12 and harder to Elton John's Rocket Man. And just like the vibe of the film was so different and so cool. Did you choose that song for that film? And if so, why that one? That was really interesting to me.
No, that wasn't me that chose that. So I just, that trip was the first time I met all like the people behind Mellow. I'd met like the year before, 2018. I'd been to Colorado as well, but just for the World Cup. I barely climbed outside that trip. And I met Keenan Takahashi when I was out there. And so kept in touch with him. And yeah, I really like him. He's a super nice guy. So the next year I went back and kind of planned a bit of a longer trip. And he introduced me to a lot of like, I went out climbing with Daniel for the first time at the start of that trip, and then got to know like Shawn and Giuliano. Giuliano was visiting at the same time, so got to know them then. And so I just sent the footage to Giuliano. He said, I'll do a little edit for Mellow. And yeah, chose Rocket Man.
Nice.
Yeah, it was nice. It's kind of maybe does capture it a bit, my like climbing experience a bit better than the hip hop and rap. Like I can get like motivated and like psyched, I guess, watching stuff like that. I really enjoyed that Alphane film and that kind of style where it gets you like your fingertips sweaty just watching it. I really enjoy that, but the state that I usually have to find for me to climb is a lot less like, I never get myself hyped up or anything. It's like I find my like level of focus through relaxation or like a lot of calm. I feel, yeah, I have to like calm myself down, like kind of relax to focus to climb hard as opposed to getting myself all fired up. But,
yeah, that's interesting.
But I enjoy it from the sidelines.
Nice. That makes me curious. What do you do? Like one boulder that stood out from that film, I mean, for people listening, it's a 6-minute film of just like send back to back to back to back, just like hard send after hard send of Aidan just climbing these classics in Rocky Mountain. I think everything in the film is V12 or harder. But the one that really stood out to me was Jade, just because that's a really well-known boulder problem, V14 up in Upper Chaos on the Green 45 boulder. And watching you do that, I was like, yes, like this is such a perfect example of what sets this guy apart. Like it's this, 45-degree overhang on these tiny little messed up crimps. I've felt the holds. I've gone up and tried the stand start a little bit. And you just make it look like a V5. Like it just looks so in your wheelhouse and so controlled. You're so good at just locking in on tiny little holds like that on that style. And you're absolutely one of the best in the world at that sort of thing. And so, I mean, that's going to be at the heart of a lot of what we talk about today, like how you've gotten so good at that. And I'm also so interested with you in a conversation that we had a week ago. We talked a lot about climbing style, and you really seem to have reflected on and embraced your own climbing style and doubled and tripled down on becoming one of the best at that versus what you could have done, which is, okay, I'm going to become like a perfectly well-rounded climber and always be attacking my weaknesses and trying to be able to do everything. It seems like you've really chosen to just go all in on that kind of crimpy, locked in sort of board style of climbing. And that shows in a lot of the hardest rock climbs you've done. I feel like I'm rambling.
Yeah.
I'm all over the place, but
No, in terms of, I think at that point I was kind of at the transition phase of like, I'd been doing a lot of comps and I was kind of transitioning to mostly just focusing on outdoor climbing during that trip in Colorado. I hadn't completely decided on it at that point. It took me a long time, but it took me a couple of years to phase out.
Hadn't decided on leaving competitions? What do you mean?
Yeah, so 2018, I was pretty much just like, that was my first year as like a senior competitor. I'd pretty much focused on youth comps in the early years of my climbing. 2018, I transitioned to the senior comps, pretty much focused just on the competitions. And then by 20, I was a bit disappointed by it. Or not disappointed by it. I felt dissatisfied with how I'd climbed in the competitions. I also feel like the actual feeling of doing the competitions wasn't quite as fulfilling as maybe I'd expected it would be. And at the end of that season, well, near the tail end of that season, I took a really long trip to Rocklands, which was my first time going. And it was like I'd never really done just like a long trip abroad bouldering before. And I think I'd done a lot of training over the previous few years, and it was in quite like classic UK style, which the origins of like board climbing often originated around the UK, and I've always been like a real advocate for training on a board. And so my training really hard was usually reflected by, or like me on good form was reflected by how well I was climbing on a board, which in hindsight, maybe I should have thought about it a bit more. It doesn't translate that well to competitions. But I'd done a lot of training for the competitions. A lot of it had been that. And as a result, I was on pretty good form on a board, which actually translates way better to climbing outside. So I went to Rocklands, and I kind of knew that I've always liked functioning. I've always liked being in the outdoors, and I really like how climbing outside can really immerse us in nature and is a real nice point of contact with the natural world. And I kind of had a stark contrast of dipping about between all these competitions to being in one place for I think I went for 5.5 weeks or 6 weeks or something, and just really immerse myself in that world, which is very it's very different to any scenery I'd been in before. So it's really cool to be just outside every day, in somewhere very novel, and really get to know a place. And every climbing day I had so much fun, and glimpses of euphoric moments that you can have in competitions, which were very rare. But there's an addictive nature to it. You're oh, the next one could be it, kind of thing. Kind of kept me in the game for a little while. I realized it wasn't quite so oscillating. I was disappointed for most of my competition experiences, but when I was outside, I'd kind of have like, it would dip between like a little spike of like a euphoric moment doing a climb, and then the base level was just like very happy and very content, as opposed to like you bomb in a competition and you're just like, oh, what is this? Like, I've spent loads of money, I've traveled all this way just to like be disappointed, and you're like in a pit. So like it was like I was a lot more stable, and like I kind of felt like the everyday I enjoyed way more, and like I actually found just the experience of like climbing outside so much more valuable for me. So I kind of knew that I was in that like trying to transition phase, but I was still kind of wrestling with it. It was quite hard to fully step away from comps. I kind of had seen myself as a comp climber for a long time. But I was quite fortunate. Like I was presented a positive alternative of this rock climbing, which I was probably quite a lot better at. So I understand it kind of made my decision quite easy in that sense, but it still took me a while. But yeah, for all of those years, I was trying to juggle up, like, on the discussion of style. You said you were rambling. I'm really rambling. On the discussion of style, on the discussion of style, I think throughout all that time being a comp climber, you're kind of wrestling, trying to like juggle up all the skills, and like naturally the way I like to train, or the training that I enjoyed most, was, like you say, like isolating on small holds and moving quite statically between them. And that was the thing I was good at. And I think I was probably good at it in the first place because in the early days of my climbing, I enjoyed it. Well, like I get a lot of satisfaction of that control I had on the wall. So that was like the way I naturally climbed. And I think I was wrestling with that throughout all of competitions, being like, this isn't very helpful. So I'll try and like get good at smashing around on slopey volumes and pinches and doing 1, 2, 3 triple dynos or whatever. And I think I'd started leaning into it a lot more. And since I've started solely climbing outside, or focusing much more on climbing outside, I've probably leaned into the style which I feel is most helpful for me to climb outside, and let the other things fall away. Not necessarily like, yeah, I guess it comes to like the phrase of like working your weaknesses, which like I do. If I have glaringly weak, I do like work things that I'm not good at, but only if they impede me, or like I'm not gonna. Well, I haven't in the past few years gone to the wall and trained doing a load of dynos. I don't really even train slabs that much because I don't usually do that many of them outside. I will train my weaknesses when they are limitations to me, but I won't go out my way to train my weaknesses to be an all-rounded climber, because it's not really what I'm looking to get out of it.
Yeah. I want to just dive really deeply into this, because you and I had a conversation that was so interesting to me. We talked about a week ago, just got to know each other a little bit, and you were telling me about your trip this past spring to Switzerland, this March and April. This is when you were out there with what I call the mellow crew. You know, it's Shawn Raboutou and Daniel Woods, Matty Hong, Dave Graham, Giuliano Cameroni, Felipe Carmago, and more people who were featured in this film. Alphane and Aidan was out there climbing with these guys. And you said a really interesting thing. I mean, you and I were talking about your climbing style, but you said that you noticed, you were really like paying attention and watching all these other amazing top-level climbers. I mean, this is a group of most of the strongest climbers in the world, boulderers in particular. And you said everyone really seemed to have their own niche. Like everyone actually had pretty glaring weaknesses, but also amazing strengths. And every single one of those guys climbed differently, but had found a way to adapt their style to these really hard boulders. And they're all climbing at a really similar level. And this is very, very interesting to me, because this is something I've been reflecting on a lot for the last few years, is realizing that I kind of romanticize like the all-rounder climber, like being able to do everything. And I've always like really sought out weaknesses. Like whenever I come across a style in climbing that I struggle with, my first reaction is like, fuck, I need to do a lot more of that. You know, I suck at that. So I need to like pivot and do a lot more of it. And that can be a really good thing, obviously. And that has really helped me grow as a climber. But in the last couple of years, I've been realizing I also have some superpower, like my own relative superpowers, and I kind of don't focus on them as much as I could. I think I could get a lot more out of actually focusing on the things that I'm good at and paying more attention to, okay, how does my body work best to climb the things that I want to climb, and what are my strengths, and how could I get even more out of my strengths? And yeah, you just represent someone who's really done an amazing job of that. But yeah, first things first, in introducing that kind of idea and getting to your own climbing style and how you think of your own climbing style, maybe first, can you tell me a little bit about what you learned climbing with all those other guys and some of the patterns or things that you saw? Like I'm putting you on the spot. I don't want you to, I don't want to make you feel like you have to judge these other climbers, because obviously they're all amazing. But yeah, what were some of the things that stood out to you from just jumping into this, pool of some of the best boulders in the world and climbing on these V16s and 17s with them?
Yeah, no, it was really cool. Yeah, I've got a few things to say about their styles. I think like it was really interesting to work. Yeah, just generally climb with them. I climbed with them quite a lot on Alphane, but I climbed with them on other stuff as well. We went and had a look at other projects we'd found. And it was really, I was really surprised to see how like, there was almost like, there was like a load of the best, like you say. They're like pretty much a group of mostly the best boulderers in the world. And they're so different. And I kind of knew that about climbing. Like, there's no magic formula in terms of like, I think it's quite an easy trap to fall into. Like, to be the best, you have to be able to hang so much off like an edge, or be able to do one armors with 20 kilos on you or something. And like all of this, like there's just no like simple way to actually be the best. And like, obviously for most people, that's not their intention anyway, but majority of climbers are looking to get better. And I think it was really interesting to see that these climbers who were like the mellow crew, it felt to me like they'd really leaned into what they knew they were good at. And it was really cool to see how stark the changes in how they'd approach climbs would be. So like, I don't know, Dave Craham's been called like a wizard of climbing at times and things. And it's kind of like almost like comical, but it was really interesting to see those climbs which like I'd like work on with him, and everyone else would like do a move, and there'd be a sequence, and they'd figure out a sequence which like would feel reliable, and they'd be like, oh yeah, nice, like that's figured out. We've done that for all the sections. We'll go from the start. And there was actually a climb in that film, Fight Club, which I think in the film Shawn and Daniel do in the Alphane film.
V14, is that right?
Yeah, that's the one. And it's quite a long climb, but there's like a obvious breakdown where you do the hard climbing and you get to like a good jug rest, and then you do like the slopey rail outright. And like the last move of the hard climbing, like generally most people were doing it a pretty similar way. You get like a front free crimp and like bringing up a vague toe hook to like stab into like a slot. And everyone kind of like did that, and was like everyone would do the move like when we were figuring it out, and people kind of like didn't question it that much. Like it was quite obvious how to do the move. But anyway, like Dave spent like hours just like figuring out this other way of like kind of like dropping down, adding like a bunch more moves. But like I can't even remember. I can't recall if he actually did the whole climb. But it was really interesting to see that it was like just doing something wasn't like enough. Like he had to like ensure there was no better way, a more efficient way. A good example is a better example actually was that Fuck the System boulder in V, which Shawn did as well, the first ascent of, and he did it like a really physical way, like very powerful. And I was trying climbing there with just Dave much later on, and he again like was just spending like sessions and sessions just like really understanding every different possibility. And he ended up doing that boulder like a completely different way to Shawn. But like he's like so perseverant on understanding the climb. and there's a lot to learn from that. Like, I mean, like, it's like amazing to see, like, people will say it, but like in terms of like physically body strong, Dave's like not that impressed. Like, as in, you put him in, like, if you were to do like some testing and like look at the data of like what most 8C plus climbers could do in terms of just like, well, there's not many 8C plus climbers, but like most 8C, like if you were to look at that, he'd like come out the bottom of the pile, but like he's so good at like kind of making, like figuring out the best way and making it work for him. And I think like he's incredibly patient, and like that's almost like his superpower. Like he's so perseverant with things and can like climb things like pretty optimally. And then like that is so radically different to like Daniel, who is flipping ridiculously strong. And I mean, the theme between all of them, they were like, I was really impressed with how perseverant they were. Like, it's something I've never really dipped into, like that proper like projecting mindset. But like they're so able to commit themselves for prolonged spells to like learn and like, or recruit themselves on a climb. But I was really amazed by like, yeah, essentially in terms of styles, Shawn, it's hard to like generalize over all climbs, but if we were to look at Alphane, the way that myself and Shawn were trying it were, well, Shawn did it, obviously. Not mean to spoil that video. I think people were aware of that. but Shawn climbs in a very different way to me. So I can go into a bit of the mechanics to it, but basically Shawn seems to be like really strong in like compressing holds, or like seems to be like the front of his body dominant. So like, in conjunction with that, basically he's really good when his hands are more open. So you spoke a lot about, I think this is where I was mentioned in one of the previous podcasts you did with Dan Varian. We spoke quite a lot about high angle crimping. I'm just trying to think the best way to go about explaining this. Maybe I'll actually explain the mechanics of how I climb and how that differs to Shawn. I think it might make a bit more sense.
Perfect.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the high angle crimping, if you haven't listened to that episode, Dan, and you go into a lot of detail into it, but essentially, basically what that is your fingers are like more acutely flexed. This is PIP joint, right?
Yeah.
Is the PIP. Yeah, they're more like acutely flexed at the PIP joint, and usually like the hallmark for it is like your pinky is also flexed at this joint. So that's what differs it to like a half crimp, which would usually be defined by like a straight pinky. So your fingers. Yeah.
Can I mention something? So Aidan's demonstrating. He's like holding his hands out in front of me. So for people that can't see the video, and I want to clarify this because I did get quite a few questions about this. Like people weren't totally understanding what high angle crimping was. But essentially, just put your hand in a full crimp position. Just imagine that you're doing a full crimp on a full crimp position with your hand on a small edge or something. Imagine that's a tiny little in-cut edge, and your fingers almost have to be pointed downward to get into the back of the hold so that you can pull outward on the hold so you have better leverage.
Yeah, that's a good way of explaining it. And so essentially that like acute flexion of all your fingers, I don't do that because that's the position that my fingers can produce the most force in. Like if I were to hang on an edge, I wouldn't be able to hang on a crimp like that on a fingerboard and be like comfortable. My go-to would always be a half crimp. So like just like the force I can generate in that position downwards, it's way worse than I would in a half crimp. But I nearly exclusively climb in that position. And that's kind of like one link in the chain which works, like builds the style I climb in mostly. Essentially what that really allows you to do is utilize any like in-cut on any holds that you use, and it allows you to generate force away from the wall. So it's like high angle crimping essentially allows you to pull your hand away from the wall, and to be able to like utilize that mostly, I'm actually pretty weak, the front half of my body. Well, I think it's relatively weak. I'm really back dominant. So like my shoulders and back will usually end up like I'll retract my shoulders. So like I'm just trying to think of how to describe this on a podcast. If you were to imagine like holding a hold beside you, your arm out at 90 degrees, and like retract your hand outwards, so like your scaps are almost touching together, like that movement uses a lot of your back and your rear delt. And so I like use those mostly, and that like allows me to like basically generate force away from the wall and like bring my like chest or center of mass quite close to the wall. I do the same with my legs actually. I actually use my feet quite a lot, but again in a similar way to like utilize any in-cut. I like Dan often would call it leg crimping when he climbs with me, but it's kind of the same thing you would do with your leg. Like when my knees are flexed, and I'm kind of like almost like you imagine you're like digging away at the wall with your foot. Like use that to like pull your hips closer to the wall as well. I do lots of hip stretching as well, so it allows me to get like quite close to the wall, and obviously that makes the holds feel more positive if your center of mass is really close to the wall.
Do you mind if I chime in again?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I think what I'll do, because you're doing an amazing job right now of demonstrating to me, who can see you on the video, how you climb. I can tell just from watching what you're doing. So I think I'll make a video clip of what we're sharing right now, maybe like a 3 to 4 minute clip. I'll share it on Instagram so people can reference that. If you're listening to the podcast, it should be published the same week as this episode comes out. So look out for that if you want to see what Aidan's talking about. But yeah, just really simply, like Aidan's incredibly good at accessing the in-cut parts of holds so that he can pull out on them and bring his chest in really close to the wall. So imagine being like really, really squared up and just pulling your chest in tight with your arm out to the side on little crimps. And you're saying that you do the same thing with your feet. So you're really looking for in-cut footholds so you can pull with your toe rather than just pushing on the foothold.
Yeah, exactly that. So like all of these little things would generally get me pretty close to the wall, and I'm like usually quite good at finding like some stability there, so I can hold those positions quite isometrically. So often like I'll do a climb and I'll often be quite slow when I do the climbs. So like you said on Jade, I made it look really easy. I can't quite remember exactly how hard I was trying, but like things are working. It's not like a walk in the park. Right. Like things are going on, but like just because the difficulty is like holding an isometric position as opposed to like moving, it usually doesn't look that bad. But so that's basically I feel like the mechanics of like what really epitomizes what I'm good at, essentially. And so in relation to the discussion we're having on Alphane and how that compared to like those other top climbers, on Alphane I ended up climbing it really differently to how Shawn was, or I'm trying it differently to how Shawn climbed it. And Shawn is very different. He actually struggles a lot more in that high angle crimping finger position, but I wonder if it's partly genetic as well, because Brooke's really good at it. Is amazing in a drag. They're like incredible. Robin's actually really good in a drag as well. So I think maybe not genetic, but maybe like physiology wise, which is something that does distinguish myself. I have like a really long pinky and a really short index.
Look at that. Your index and pinky finger are almost the exact same length. Yeah, which is quite strange. But that means that to be in a half crimp, my fingers are like really open. And so like if my pinky is straight, my other fingers are actually like pretty open. And that means that you get even less like outward force. But anyway, Shawn is amazing in like a half crimp and especially a drag. And obviously you can't really generate any force away from the holds using like in that position, just because if you think about like dragging a hold and pulling outwards, like you literally just pull your fingers off the wall. Like drags are really good because you're like reliant on friction, but you have to like generate the force to produce that friction by moving your body about the hold well, and also like generating a lot of force with like the rest of your body to oppose it. So generally like he uses his chest a lot, and like he seems to be a lot more like front body dominant. And so if you look at the way he climbs that, he like is quite open on most of the holds,
there's a really interesting example on like down low. There's like you cross to an undercut, and both me and Shawn readjust on this undercut for the next move, but he readjusts to open his hand up more to stand into the undercut, and I readjust to like fully close my hand into a full crimp. It's great. We're very different, but yeah, he like so he basically will be quite open-handed on the holds and like use the rest of his body to oppose the holds quite well. And it's interesting, he basically drags a lot of the holds, which I like crimp up on. But I think it's quite cool in it. Alphane is a cool boulder in that I was able to find a way where I can actually utilize the in-cut of the holds, and I do use I use all the same holds, but I use a slightly different like sequence of them, and generally leave my feet a bit lower. And I kind of just, my sequence is quite different. But it was really interesting to me to analyze how people do that, and I don't know how much they like communicate all of it together. They all seem like I think Shawn especially was impressive in like how susceptible he felt to like learning about things. Like he seemed quite analytical about things as well. I haven't had really explicit conversations about like climbing styles with him, but he definitely seemed quite open-minded to like suggestions, and was like, it seemed like he was really looking at what was working for people. And yes, it seems like he was making some quite interesting observations as well. So I wonder how analytical he is about it too. But I definitely thought it was really interesting for me how like it really emphasized how there's no real formula to be good at something, especially in climbing. Like it's so complex, and I think that like relates to most climbers in that like you probably don't have to just like go with the hype of what it is to be strong, and actually like stop and consider what you're good at, and make sure that if the things that you want to do can be done in a style which you're good at, like make sure the training that you're doing kind of contributes something to how you're going to be doing something, and not just like training is training. Like it can be so specific. So I think I've definitely thought a lot more about my style of climbing more recently, just in recent years. I think probably partly because it felt like it's very easy to spend a lot of time and energy training in a way which like isn't particularly helpful. So it's definitely taken a bit of considering, but has felt very helpful. It's felt much easier to do it climbing outside because you don't have to be such a generalist. You can be a bit of a specialist. And I think it's quite interesting. Like Alphane is slightly different to the other like 9As dotted about. It seems like it can be climbed in different ways. I mean, I don't really know. I haven't really seen much of other people like trying Return of the Sleepwalker, but it seems like there's a few 9As which has now been done, like kind of like the glass ceiling has been broken. It's a bit like less elusive in terms of like, I think people are pretty, there's like confidence that 9As exist these days, whereas like it was a bit like mythical recently. Sure. But like no 9A has been repeated yet. And I think it's like probably a bit of a testament to like the specialist nature of these climbers. Like it's so rare to find something that fits so perfectly into someone's style. But the reason is when they do and spend a lot of time doing it, it's probably really hard. And like it's quite hard for other people to try and like adapt that sequence to their own style. And I mean, like, I think Alphane's an exception to that.
Yeah.
I know, certainly, I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point. I went to try Burden of Dreams, and that felt like the formula that I usually use to tackle hard climbing, or the way I usually climb, was not very helpful on that. So it was kind of almost back to the drawing board. And so I think it's probably partly one of the reasons why these really hard boulders don't get many repeats, because it usually takes a specialist to find a piece of rock which aligns well with their specialty, and then they spend a load of time on it. And that's kind of almost what constitutes a 9A these days, which makes them pretty hard. I say these days. No, well, that's what constitutes a 9A. So, it's definitely been a interesting thought process, and it's definitely played into a lot of my training. Like the detail has been fun to try and implement into a more like general training plan as well.
Okay, let's dive more deeply into that. I really want to hear how you think about this. You've already mentioned this. We've kind of talked around it a little bit, but one of the things that stood out to me most from our first conversation, you mentioned that, it's really popular to focus on very simple, quote, tasks in our training. Can you elaborate on that? Can you tell me what you meant by that again? And then I'm really curious to hear, because you've tried that and it didn't really work that well for you. So I'd love to hear you talk about that. But then contrasting that with how you think of your training now and some of the staples that you include in your training, I think would be really interesting. And yeah, I'll just open it up to you. But the simple tasks, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think like usually people associate climbing training with trying to be strong. I mean, obviously there's a bit about trying to be good as well, but lots of time people maybe spend a lot of time trying to be strong. And often the definition of being strong for climbing, which often motivates people's training, is quite reductive, or like the metrics for being strong will be like generally will be simple things like doing a one armor or hanging on an edge with a bunch of weight. And it's almost like if you're bad at those, you're weaker. And so you can climb well because you're good, but not because you're strong, which like, I definitely like. On top of that, they're almost so like party tricks. Like it's quite fun to be able to like do a bunch of one armors, and like it's quite a nice feeling like to be able to generate that kind of force. So I definitely got sucked into that at times and was like quite disheartened by being bad at it. Like I'm not like terrible at it, but like compared to most people I've trained with one of my really good friends, Jim Pope from the UK, who's really good at this kind of these metrics of strength. And it's always been confusing because like outdoors on small holds, I'm usually a bit better than he is, but as soon as we get like inside onto a fingerboard or a bar, like I look like a total novice. And at times I think like not in that specific example, like not in my relationship with Jim, but like just in general, like I think I'd been frustrated by it and like tried to train it because I was like, I shouldn't be bad at this. Like this is something that I need to be good at, but was finding that I put a load of energy into it and time and like kind of like almost important. I put like a lot of value in it as well. And it was making very little difference to my climbing. And it just really didn't apply very well to the style in which I climb. Like on the discussion of the mechanics, I very rarely climb in a half crimp, and there was like actually not that much crossover for me in like that perfect style. And obviously it helps on the like there's a lot of stuff it does help on, but like for the things that I was trying to do, it wasn't particularly useful. And I think there's other reasons why they're so popular as well. Like I think like it's something that's very relatable in that like that's become very popular in recent years. You see it with like the rise of like standardized boards and things which are like blowing up at the moment. But like until for pretty much most of like climbing's life, like you couldn't really that wasn't a thing. And so the things which you could measure were like an edge size, because well, beast makers have been around for years, but like they're everywhere. So like people could, that was like a form of training where people could relate to like, oh, Alex Magos can hold this with 30 kilos. Like that's what it is to be strong. And like a bar is the same anywhere in the world. So if you can do 10 one arms on it, you can do 10 one armers in America or Europe. Like, and so it's kind of like a way to like connect these feats of strength and like kind of,
right.
I think that is quite cool. And I mean, like that, obviously that concept has captivated people's imaginations because like they're like the kilter boards and all of that, moon boards, and they're doing really well. People love them. And it is really cool. I guess they're more climbing specific, but I think it can kind of lead you down a path of having your like intermediate goals being training related, not actually applying well to perhaps what you're actually trying to do. So I think what I kind of really changed and would like mostly encourage people to as well is like, if you set yourself a goal or want to do something, to make sure that all of the training that you do is like kind of aligned well with that, or it's like considers to why it would be helpful to what you're trying to do, if that makes sense. Is that kind of what you meant by simple tasks?
Yes, that's exactly what I meant. Yeah. And it's funny, I'm like kind of laughing at myself because I'm sure I have perpetuated this issue, if we can call it an issue, or this propensity towards reductionism and training, because I'm like, all I want in my life is to be able to hang the Beastmaker center edge with one arm, because that's always been really hard for me. And, in general, climbing on steeper terrain and loading up my fingers more versus the background I have climbing at Smith Rock, which is very fingery. It's on tiny holds, but a lot of your weight's on your feet. Climbing on a steeper board with more weight on my hands has been incredibly helpful, but I think you're totally right. Like over focusing on just being able to one arm hang an edge. I mean, that's not really going to lead me to my goals. And I probably climb in a way, I actually do use that type of grip quite often. And even so, the applicability is, not amazing. So yeah, point well taken. I think this is really great. I think it'd be really interesting to hear you talk about two different things. A lot of people, after the conversation with Dan, especially, wanted to hear how you got so good, how you've gotten so good at the high angle crimp style that you climb in. And you can tackle that however you want. I don't know if you train your fingers specifically for that, or if it's just doing all the board climbing that you do kind of in that style. So I think let's start with that. And then I think it'd be really interesting to hear. Let's go back to the very start of this conversation with those bullet points with Alphane. Like, how are you getting very, very specific with your preparation for the specific boulder you want to do this fall?
Yeah. No, absolutely. So, shall I do the former first, and then which order do you want?
Let's do it. Let's do the high angle crimps. Like, how did you get so good at this?
I guess like, I've actually always been like, my tendency has always been towards small holds. I think quite early on in my days of climbing, Dan actually started like almost mentoring me, and we kind of realized that I didn't really have regular access to climbing walls so much with the temperamental weather in the lakes. You kind of need somewhere and you can train as well, because it's, especially for winter, permanently wet. So he helped me set up a board in my stable, which is still the board I use today. And I think just the nature of that's a 50-degree board. And so quite quickly, the majority of my training was down there. And at the time, I think as I got better or more used to climbing on a board, because before that I'd kind of just been climbing walls around the lakes, I ended up like adapting almost a style of the board to like the outdoor climbing around the Lake District. And often the holds are a lot smaller and a lot more in-cut. So I think like generally that led to me functioning on small holds became quite like familiar to me. But I do actually remember even in the earlier days of my climbing, I'd be quite focused on wanting to do climbs well. Like if I do a boulder and felt it was scrappy, I'd do it again. And I think I never really quite realized this until much later on. That will have been like 4 years into my climbing, 3 or 4 years into my climbing. I set my board up like maybe 3 years into my climbing or so.
How old were you when you started?
About 12 or 13.
Okay.
And yeah, begun quite like a proper hobbyist. Would go after school every now and again. And then when I turned 14, I could go unsupervised. And so I just went by myself, but just to a little climbing wall, and kind of outgrew it before long, and then went up to the climbing wall that Dan's wife owns up in Carlisle, in Rock, and I was like a regular there. But then that's quite a long way, so public transport in the lakes is awful as well. And so quite quickly needed to have somewhere I could access a bit more easily. But yeah, I remember in my mind, I'm not quite sure where I derived it from, but to climb something well for me felt like everything was in control. And so like if there was no uncertainty about doing the moves, and so every move was like felt like it was like there was no moment where I was out of control. That was like for me how I'd do something nicely. And I think the easiest way to have no uncertainty about doing a move is often like by doing it quite statically, or like not necessarily statically, but like you're able to get the hold. The slower you're moving, the more precise you can be on each hold. And like I think there was a lot in like what I was holding, but I also like really like the feeling of moving on a board, and was quite in tune with like just the feeling of being in control. So I kind of never really realized I was doing it at the time, but was always quite switched on to that. And so I actually think it sounds quite trivial, but like I think the warm-up routine that I developed on my board, because it was like there were boulders that were slightly like below my limit, I wasn't like at the living end, and I kind of had a tendency to go to that style where like I'd almost like stop in front of every hold, almost like not like I wouldn't necessarily hover in front of every hold, but I would feel like I could. So it feels like I could stop at any point in the movement before grabbing the next hold. And I realized I started doing this on climb. Like as I got better, I'd start taking climbs which used to be quite snatchy for me, and like almost like bullying them into this style to the point where like I could get it to the point where I could stop at any point in the movement if I wanted to. And like that level of control was something that like I was always quite fascinated by. So I think like what I went looking for was actually like the feeling of it, but I like kind of stumbled into that like style of climbing, which really has like become like the niche of climbing, which I've done that I've like done all right in recent years. So I think that was probably like the early days, how I got into that style. I think like the high angle crimping, I mentioned a little bit about the physiology of fingers. And I think like essentially, unless something is quite slopey, I would very rarely climb in a half crimp anyway, just because my pinky is so long. And for my pinky to be straight, my other fingers have to be really open. And so it almost has to be like a sloper for me to climb in that position. So even if something's not very in cut, usually I will end up holding it with a slightly flexed pinky as well, even if it's not really acutely flexed. And so I think because of that, I like kind of became quite used to that position. And then it was actually probably, I wasn't so old when me and Dan stumbled across the sling training or sling testing that he had a chat with you about. And I actually did, so that was really interesting when we stumbled across that. We had a lot of chats about that. And it was, I'm just trying to think if that was before. I think it was around the time when I took a bad fall when I was quite young in Fontainebleau, and had like reconstructed my calcaneus. I like shattered my heel. So I had quite a long recovery process from that. I had like 4 months or something of not climbing, and was just like climbing footless on my board, and doing a lot of fingerboarding and a lot of like upper body stuff basically. And that was like quite surreal. I was very much like I was relatively good on small holds, but like a very technical climber. And it was quite funny then going back into climbing, having done like a 4-month block of like power upper body training and suddenly trying to remember to climb again, but also being able to like pull on holds, which I couldn't before. It was quite a funny time, but my fingers got quite strong in that spell actually. And that was around the time when like that we were starting to like experiment with that sling stuff. And I started getting quite good on the small holds, and I think there was a couple of sessions we had when Dan was like, "Oh, that kid, he's got me on the little tiny crimps." There was like a transition period where I started having him on the small holds, and I think we like analyze a lot of like the weights and like kind of like adding up all like the weights we could hang on our fingers, and I mean, I'm still quite fascinated by it today. I haven't understood it all, and I think like stumbling across that, like kind of I began to understand what it was that I was good at, and why like I struggled to hang on an edge but I was good on small holds, and it kind of like was beginning to make a bit more sense, and I was kind of piecing this puzzle together a little bit. And I did actually do quite a lot of training with those mono slings. I think it's a funny form of training. I think it like strains your lumbricals quite a lot. So I was always quite careful I never actually injured my lumbricals doing it. I did actually once injure my pinky doing it. But it wasn't so bad. But I never actually damaged my lumbricals in doing it. In like doing that mono sling training, but I definitely would feel like quite a strange level of like it was good for isolating certain fingers and like understanding weaknesses, but I think Dan might have mentioned this as well. I would rarely use it as like a training technique, but more like a testing technique to kind of understand where it's at. And I do use it a lot for rehab, so if I've got like a finger that is injured and I want quite a measured rehab, you can obviously isolate a single finger, and that's way better than just like hanging on an edge and compensating with your other fingers. So it's hard to tell exactly where it came from, but I think like I always had a tendency to that style of climbing. And then I think once I realized that that was the movement that I enjoyed, I like kind of would adopt that style when I could, and that like in turn kind of just like, yeah, I think the style I enjoyed ended up being the style I was good at, which I think will be the case for most people. Whether they know how they climb or not. But I think it's definitely helpful to kind of understand the mechanics of what you're good at or the way you like to climb. And I think most of the time, unless someone's always been quite switched on to working their weaknesses, people will probably be good at the way they in some way enjoy.
Can I summarize all that back to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
And see if it feels like it fits. So what I'm hearing you say is that you just always really enjoyed the sensation of feeling really locked in on moves, feeling really controlled and really static on moves. And probably your finger physiology, just the lengths of your different fingers, led you to be stronger in that high angle crimp position, being able to pull outward on the holds, because your pinky's pretty long, so the half crimp, you're not getting that dragged pinky in a half crimp like a lot of people would. And then you've just always climbed that way because you're good at it, because you enjoy that sensation. That's how you climb. That's how you've continued to climb. That's how you train on the board. That's how you warm up on the board. And so it makes sense that you've just gotten better and better and better and better at it. And then experimenting with the sling test with Dan, for instance, for people that haven't heard that episode, just crimping one finger in isolation and picking up a weight off the ground using a sling around your fingertip. That's what Dan and I talked about, measuring each finger's strength in isolation. It sounds like that just helped you understand why you were good at that, versus it's not like you did the test and then realized like, oh, I need to work on this, 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 and this, and then develop this sort of finger strength. It seems like the test helped you understand, oh, I'm very, very good at this because of this static way that I climb. Does that all resonate with you? Does that feel like I'm getting it right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think part of the understanding the why it was that I was good on those style of holds kind of in turn did help me progress in that style as well, in that like I kind of realized that my passion for climbing didn't lie in hanging on edges. And so I kind of was like less caught up in the fact that I wasn't a mega wad on a Beastmaker, but could like kind of spend a bit more time focusing on the things which were helpful. So I have done like a lot of fingerboard sessions in that position. So when I like do train in that position, like that a high angle crimping position. I usually don't wrap my thumbs over. I usually just keep the thumbs below my fingers. But I would train in that position because I knew that was like way more applicable for me. And like definitely doing a sling test was interesting in that it really I really understood my indexes were really weak. I was definitely like the back of my hands did a lot more than the front, and so I did do quite a lot of training to like kind of assist that. And I think especially that is quite helpful because sometimes when you climb on a hold which like is too narrow for all 4 of your fingers and requires 3, I used to always preference back 3 over front 3
in a crimp.
In a crimp, yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
interesting.
I'd always like that would be like definitely stronger for me. But Dan spoke about this a little bit as well, about the benefits of dragging and the mobility it gives your wrist. It's kind of the same back 3 and front 3. Like you get a lot more mobility crimping front 3 than you do back 3, really. And so it is really good to be able to climb in holds like that. So I think that kind of indicated things which were limitations for me. And that has been something that has been that's been like a weakness which I've observed, which I've been like, wow, that is a weakness which is limiting. And so has been something I've actively worked on, and it has helped. So I think like, I'm not saying like understand what you're good at and only train that. I think it's understand what you want to do and what is stopping you doing it, and then like align your training or your preparation to make sure it fit.
Yeah, that's cool.
But yeah, no, other than that, yeah, that was just a continuation. It was a good summary.
Would you be willing to share your sling test numbers with me so I can link to them so people can look at them? Do you have those numbers?
I'm just trying to think Matt. I think I once did 20.5 kilos on my pinkies.
In a crimp.
Yeah, in a crimp position.
For reference for people, I tested my pinkies in a crimp position and I think my max was 9 kilos. So Aidan's got 11.5 kilos on each pinky on me, which is pretty amazing.
That's definitely, it's not consistent for all my fingers.
Yeah.
Like that was
well, you're also one of the best boulderers in the world, and I'm hoping to climb V12 someday. So there's a big gap between us, so it makes sense. But yeah.
But yeah, I think also if you were to look at our other fingers, there'd be a lot less disparity.
Okay.
Because I know my indexes were much weaker. I think I maybe did like 16 kilos on my indexes.
Okay.
My middle 2, I can't quite remember. I don't think I ever really went those completely max.
Okay.
So I'm a bit unsure about my exact data doing that. I know the thing which isn't always common with when I added it all up. So I've done it using like picking up weights off the floor using a sling, or I have like a little like mono which I kind of made. So it's like measurable the depth that my finger goes into the into like the hold you pick up. But I have done it on a force plate before, like doing like the mono crimps, but almost not entirely hanging, but you like pull down on it and it's attached to a force plate so you can measure the force. I did this like I've started working with, well, for the past 3 years, I've been working with Ollie Torr, who I think you might be having a chat with at some point, right?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
So I started working with him when I was like transitioning to just being a rock climber. And so it's been quite interesting because they obviously do a lot of testing, and lots of their testing data is based around what are the quite measurable exercises we discussed earlier. And I think it is quite interesting because usually they like get correlations from that data and try and determine like what people could be climbing. When they get like an obvious, like when they see trends in the data, they'll like establish like a algorithm so that if you input your data that you should be able to predict how hard you can climb. And I think I'm probably a bit of an outlier in that system, in that I'm probably a bit crap on like the tests. So I think we did a few tests, and like initially it was like kind of confirmed what I knew, and he was like, oh yeah, like you're not crap, but like yeah, you've definitely got like a long way to go in this. But then we started being a bit more detailed with the data, and I know when we tested my individual fingers, I should try and maybe if we do a follow-up one, I'll try and get the data off Ollie.
Yeah, that'd be
Ollie
awesome.
can say, because we did do like the individual fingers and added them up, and I think it was quite dramatic. It was like 160% of the force I could produce when all of my fingers were together.
Huh. Wow, that's fascinating.
Which, yeah, is quite strange. I remember being a bit confused by it, but yeah, I think being able to like produce a lot of force in that position, like in isolated fingers, I think is quite helpful for outside, where the holds are often less ergonomic. So like
less uniform.
Yeah, lots of the time, hold manufacturers understandably make the holds comfortable, whereas Mother Nature is often never so kind, and we end up crimping up on the crystals.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll try and get that data for you.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember my pinkies were like my little party trick, because it was somewhere that was quite good. But I haven't tested it in a while. So
Okay, cool.
I can't vouch for what they're at now.
Just purely out of curiosity, because I think of you as someone who has like some of the strongest fingers in the world, but as we've been talking about, it's very specific to the style in which you climb. How strong are you on like the Beastmaker 2000 center edge? Just for context for people.
So actually, I'm just trying to think how much I could hang on that. I probably haven't really tried it in the past couple of years. I basically don't really use that edge. I use like the outside ones more so. Essentially, I found with that edge as well, your pinky ends up doing so much because it's big enough to like kind of nestle a lot of like the skin on the edge. I found it was like trash my pinky skin, but I also found that you'd need quite a big hold outside to have the same like impact. So I don't really test, or if I would hang on it, I'd have my pinky like retracted to the edge because it felt much more applicable. So I guess like maybe for like a little gauge of where people are, it would be good for me to try it. But I would always focus on like the outside edges, which are much smaller, and you just be on like the tip of your pinky. But like on the outside edge, like it would take a good day for me to hang it body weight. Like I can probably like, yeah, on a good day, I could probably do 5 seconds body weight on that, but I wouldn't really be adding weight.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that is surprising when comparing you to someone like Magos or something. I mean, that's a really big difference.
Yeah. No, I'm, and I think in the past, part of me has been a little like embarrassed about that. I'd be like, oh, like these people all think I've got strong fingers. I can't show them that I'm terrible at this, but yeah, my passion doesn't lie on a fingerboard for my goals on those wooden edges. But
credit to you. Well, this is so interesting because I think between this conversation and my conversation with Dan, I'm really starting to understand just how maybe misplaced my own understanding of my own finger strength has been in the last like year or so, because I really, really struggle on like a one-arm dead hang sort of thing, even on a pretty big edge. But I've been paying more attention to like my grip position on an edge like that. Like let's take the Beastmaker center edge, whatever that is, like 22, 23 millimeter. And my pinky, it's not as long as yours, but it almost ends up like kind of in this weird in-between no man's land where it's not quite short enough to just drag on the edge, but it's not long enough to crimp up on the edge. So it just kind of feels like it can't do a whole lot, you know?
It's a bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, it's a bit uncomfortable, and I'm kind of like skin catching on that, that dip, that crease, like right below your dip joint. But yeah, I just feel like I'm not getting much out of it. But outside, I boulder harder than you would think that I would based on those numbers that I get on like a 20 mil edge or something. But this is probably why. I think it's because I'm good at like, engaging individual fingers a little bit better on like a weird shaped hold or things. And it's pretty rare that I run into that issue because, you don't get a perfectly flat, rounded, comfy 23 millimeter edge outside very often. So Yeah. Super interesting.
Yeah, usually your skin on your fingers will nestle up if you're on a jug when you're outside. Like it's quite rare that you get an edge where that is applicable. But like you mentioned earlier on, you grew up climbing on you said on like slightly more like vert or slabby stuff where you were on small holds, but a lot of weight was in your feet. I imagine because of that angle, the holds generally, for the moves to be hard, the holds are probably really quite small.
Mm-hmm.
And usually, like, if a hold is really small, you'll like utilize like this. You'll probably end up crimping up on them, or like, it's rare. Like, you probably don't find yourself dragging on micro edges, or it's really hard to.
Yeah, like I'm probably pretty good at like 2-finger front 2 crimps, relative to a lot of people that climb at a similar level to me, because I've done a lot of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so you might. I don't know if you will know entirely, but like it's quite hard as well because not many people do this sling testing, or like it's a lot less like measurable when you kind of introduce the angles of people's fingers. If you just see how much weight you can hold on this edge, people will hold that edge in any which way they can. But like to standardize the angle in which you can like hold onto something, it's a lot harder to like control. So there's not really so much data on like what is good. But I would anticipate if you spent a lot of time in that style and struggled to hang on like half crimping on that edge, that chances are like if you can climb harder than you'd expect someone with that data to be able to, you'll probably like be better at like that high angle crimping, or like it would be quite interesting to see the way in which you hold the holds when you do climb near your limit. But it might be something that you're quite good at. I think like, yeah, it is like just like fingerboarding, like, or just like having a fingerboard session. There's a lot of complexity to it. It can't just be like, oh, I've done loads of fingerboarding, so my fingers are getting stronger. It obviously has to apply to how you actually then climb. So yeah, you might also find that like you'd have a tendency to that high angle crimping kind of thing due to like your roots in climbing, but feel like you have, inverted commas, weak fingers because you can't hang on the edge, which is so accepted.
Right.
But yeah, I'm hammering the point home now.
Nice.
I mean, going at it.
I don't want to spend too much time here because I had a whole 2-hour podcast with Dan Varian about the sling test and this really geeky finger stuff. So I want to get back to your rock climbing. Actually, I feel like I should close the loop on this. I do have one more question. When you found out that your index fingers were weak relative to your other fingers, what did you do to address that, or what are you doing to address that?
I definitely, initially, when I've discovered it, I was using like the mono crimping as like a training tool, not just a testing tool. So I did actually hammer that quite a lot, which did make a difference. It was quite good. And I'm still a bit, essentially, I think the risk of doing it is like you can be quite susceptible to injury doing it. I think if you're really measured, it can be helpful. So I did do that quite a lot, which I did notice a big difference. But I started like, essentially the way in which I'd then apply that strength was in a front free crimp, climbing without your pinky basically, when the hold's too small to allow it. And so that was kind of like what I want to get better at. So I definitely initially got my fingers, I'd had quite a prolonged spell of like training my index with a mono sling, and that like did get them quite a lot stronger. But I feel like the familiarity of like, I did a lot of training in like front free half crimp position, and I'd usually do that 2 arms added weight. And usually my go-to has always been to use an edge as small as I can before skin becomes a limiting factor. So generally actually I'd use the outside edge on the Beastmaker 2000.
I think that's like 13 mil maybe for people listening, something like that. Kind of pretty rounded though. Yeah. It's kind of like, it's enough so it's like, it's rounded enough so it's very comfortable. I don't lose any skin, but like I'm very much on like the pad of my fingers, so I'm not like using any extra assistance. And so I'd kind of like train in that position because it also felt very unnatural for me to drop my pinky, or like I felt like
quite exposed, like exposing your ring finger was like, it felt quite risky for me, or like it felt very unnatural for me. And so I was quite slow, like progressing into that. And then I also like focused quite a lot on like in that like front free half crimp position, not like kind of rotating my like thumbs towards me, which would like load my ring finger more and like take load off my index. I focused on like internally rotating my hands. So like I'd like make sure that I was like keeping weight on my index. So like I wasn't just using what was good to like kind of take weight off what was weak. So I've kind of like played around with that. And I've definitely noticed a difference climbing outside as well. Like at one point I'd try everything I could to try and like nestle in fingers and like kind of squeeze your fingers together, which can sometimes work quite well on holds. But being able to have like the front free be quite strong in a front free crimp is like just a tool which is good to be able to access. So yeah, I was like initially, to summarize, definitely did some of that mono sling training. But then once I'd done that, I kind of figured out why I was doing that. It was to be better in that like front free half crimp position. And I guess generally just like when I'm on small holds, like if my index can take more weight, I'm obviously going to be able to use smaller holds or put more force through it. But yeah, really like it was mainly I kind of realized that it was a glaring weakness, that I was bad in that position. So then I trained that position and made sure I was like kind of engaging the index in that position.
I love it. I mean, it reminds me so much of talking to Dan. It's so clear to me like how much thought you put into, you know, it's not just like the fingerboard protocol. It's like the sensation of how you're loading your fingers on an edge on the hangboard. Because I'm, like you were saying, if you were to train your front three in a crimp with your index finger being the weaker finger, you could kind of torque your hands outward and load the ring fingers more and compensate and probably hang a little bit more weight. But what you're choosing to do is be more patient, probably be more conservative with the load, and just really focus on driving inward on those index fingers. And it's just, it's, go ahead.
No, I definitely think quality is really, like really important when training my fingers, or like as in like
attention to detail and
and I think it comes back to this point about like understanding why I'm doing it as well. Like I want to do it so that I'm better when I'm climbing on the rocks, or like my goals lie in rock climbing, and so like my training feels like it ought to be adapted for that. And so generally, like if I really know what I need to do to be able to like what I need to work on to be better at that, or like the training is like it's a means to an end, and so I'll do it in like the quality way which will translate best. So I'd much rather have a little bit less weight attached to my waist, but be holding the edge in like a position which is applicable, than to be able to hold it suboptimally but throw a load more weight on. It's just less useful.
That's awesome. Yeah, and for people listening, if you're going to go do any sort of mono crimp training, please be careful. Please just be patient and start really, really light and ease your way in, because it does put a weird strain on the lumbricals, and it just feels sketchy if you've never done it before, and it probably is sketchy if you've never done it before. So I think the takeaway there is just slow. Just start really light and take tons and tons of time if you're going to try to build up any sort of load.
Sadly for listeners, there is no rapid magic formula for finger strength, and so if you do try something new, you want to go slow. The biggest thing that will impede your progress is if you get injured, so you're better off taking it a bit slower. But yeah, no matter what you do, you're not going to solve the issue of weak fingers overnight.
All right, so let's take this philosophy that you have of quality and applicability, and I want to hear how you're thinking about that with approaching your training for Alphane. Can you give me some examples? Like, what are some things that you're focusing on for this training block, you know, that are very I guess let's just go back to the start of the conversation with those bullet points. Like, what are a few of the things that you noticed when you were trying the boulder this spring? What are some of the bullet points that you made notes of, and how are you addressing those in your current training?
Yeah, so lots of the like attention to detail I have when I approach a climb, I kind of adopted that strategy or that approach to it a lot from in my younger years climbing with Dan. So he has quite a similar analytical approach to projecting a climb. And what that usually consists of is when we're figuring out a move, we'll be quite switched on to what feels as though has gone wrong, and we'll be like quite experimental about like other options, like whether, well, okay, for simplicity's sake, say we've tried all options and we've like figured out that this is like probably the best holds to use or something. Just so obviously we'll try all the other options of like hold sequences. This is approaching a new climb. But when it's just a case of doing a move, were something to go wrong, we'll be like quite thoughtful as to like what has gone wrong, and we'll be quite experimental in like trying new options, but be quite like calculated in when we try something new, be aware what we're trying. And so when you stumble across, generally you'll try a few things and you'll have an inkling of like, it will be like an educated, it won't just be a shot in the dark as to now I'll try rotating my ankle this way or whatever. Like it will be like, usually this is a kind of formula which works, and like maybe this will apply well to this. So when we do a move, when we like do something which works well, it would be like, that would be like a little detail of that move to remember. And usually you end up with a collection of these for each move of like things which work and things which are you often like, once you've committed to a sequence on a move or like a particular set of moves, you'll understand what generally is the limiting factor of that move. So perhaps where you have to like apply your focus. And usually when I was talking about bullet points, I usually have a collection of these things about each move, and I try to make it as simple as possible. So like it might come down to, I'll have like learned maybe like a handful of details about a move, but I don't want to remember 10 details about a 15 move problem and 10 details about every move, because I'll just be like, it'll be a crazy memory game. And I want to be able to like, I don't want to have to think about all of the things to remember for the next move. So often I will try and like condense them down to like the most limiting factor. So it might just be like, well, I know that if I think to myself to keep pressure on that foot, likely these other things are going to work as well. And I kind of know what feels right in that position. And usually it's the foot that blows. So like, that's my little like bullet point for this move. And I usually end up with a list of these things.
Is this a physical list? Do you write this stuff down?
No, usually it's kind of just tucked away in the noggin. But I have done it before where I've written things down. I guess it's helpful if you go away from a boulder and come back. I have written some things down for Alphane because I like kind of learned it pretty well and then left it. But most of them actually, I haven't found myself having to refer to a list. I've kind of remembered them quite well anyway. But essentially all of this, like kind of these quite precise points which I'd made in my head were definitely quite helpful when I was setting my replica, because I knew what were the things that would go wrong and like what I usually did in the positions, which can be quite subtle, but felt necessary for me to do the moves. And so if I can replicate those, then I know the moves are probably somewhat quite helpful to practice. So that was kind of like that kind of like approach to detail. It's always felt quite useful. It feels like it really reduces any random error. And especially like often when you're projecting or like giving really attempts like on something really hard for you outside, usually you don't have that many goes. In the example of Alphane, it's quite long. And I mean, when I first tried it, it was like the end of Shawn's process on it, and he was having like 2, maybe 3 goes a day. So you get very few goes. So like reducing random error is really helpful because I don't know, you don't want to like foot to pop on the last hard move. And then often like that's quite a rare example where skin usually isn't an issue, and usually you can't just like burn through a load of attempts because you usually got limiting factors down to like, yeah, skin or other things out of your control. So generally attempts really matter when you're right at your limit. And so to control everything that you can feels quite helpful for me. And it extends to like the intricacies of the move as well. Like it's kind of like a bit of a ritual for me, but I don't know how much of it is actually like, I don't necessarily think all of it is entirely like physically helpful, but like I'm usually quite like, before I'd have an attempt, I'd be quite careful of like cleaning a hold, but like not too much. Like especially like on granite as well. If like a hold has no chalk in it, it can be like a little bit slippier. And like I'll go through the process of cleaning the holes, cleaning my shoes, kind of like making sure the landing's all good. And like it will like kind of all these things to settle my mind to like, so that when I pull on, I can be like content that everything I could have controlled, I have. I find that gives me some peace of mind. And I think it's also like a little way in which like I can access some like, it's almost like a mechanism for me to kind of access like the state I feel like I usually need to be in to try my hardest.
And we will be right back. This episode is brought to you by Frictitious Climbing. Today, I want to tell you about my two favorite products from Frictitious. First up is the Easy Board, spelled EZ board. It's hands down the most versatile hangboard I have ever seen. It's portable, meaning you can take this thing to the crag and hang it from a tree or from a bolt at the sport cliff. But what makes the Easy Board unique is that it comes with a mounting plate that allows it to be used as a traditional hangboard. In just a few seconds, you can mount it above your doorway at home in any of 4 different orientations and use it just like a regular hangboard. It's light, it's compact, and it covers all your bases. It's awesome. Check it out. Second is the Hangboard Doorway Mount. The Hangboard Doorway Mount is perfect for climbers who don't have a great spot for a hangboard at home or who can't drill into their wall. It's a great way to train in your home or apartment, and you can even have Frictitious install one of their hangboards for you, so when it arrives, you can be up and training in minutes. This thing's awesome. It's super easy to set up, it's bomber, and it's rock solid even if you have weight added to you when you're hangboarding. So check it out. Head over to frictitiousclimbing.com and use code NUGGET at checkout for free shipping on your order. That's frictitiousclimbing.com and use code NUGGET at checkout for free shipping. Train, solve, climb with Frictitious Climbing. This episode is also brought to you by Petzl. Today, I want to talk about harnesses. When it comes to harnesses, comfort can mean a lot of different things. Sometimes you want a harness for hard red points or light and fast adventures. And on other days, you might need something for long belays and multiple rappels. There's no such thing as a perfect harness. The perfect harness is the one that's perfect for you. And you probably do a lot of different stuff. That's why Petzl builds harnesses for gym climbing, cragging, and alpine adventures using 4 unique constructions. Frame construction has the traditional fit, comfort levels, and safety features climbers are used to. Endo frame construction provides flexibility and cushion. Fuse frame construction is streamlined yet supportive. And wireframe construction harnesses are breathable and ultra lightweight. So, whether you want lightweight performance or plush comfort, Petzl harnesses have you covered. To learn more about Petzl harnesses, visit your local retailer or Petzl's website at petzl.com. Again, you can learn more and shop for Petzl harnesses at your local climbing shop or online at petzl.com. Experience the difference with Petzl. And now, back to the show. In setting up your replica, can you give me more examples of how you implemented some of these bullet points? Like maybe you can describe some of the hardest specific moves and what you were thinking about when you set those on your board.
Yeah, so I guess like it's not easy for many climbs because the holds like I'm quite fortunate. I've got a home board and most of my holds are wooden, and I quite like wood carving. So I do quite a lot of that, and so I can adapt the holds. I do that for quite a few of my holds.
You like shape them to be more similar to the actual holds on the rock.
Yeah. So
cool.
I will carve some of them. Like if there's like some obvious, like there's like one hold on Alphane, which kind of like your back three on one edge and your back three are on like an edge slightly above where your index is. And so it kind of like splits your hand a little bit. And so I could like hand carve that into a hold, which I mean, no hold manufacturer would ever want to make that because it's objectively slightly uncomfortable.
Right.
So that's quite helpful. And that's usually where I start, like kind of making holds which feel similar. Obviously the angle is slightly different. And so you have to like kind of take that into account. The holds obviously have to be worse. But I'm more trying to generate the positions. So usually when I'm setting replica, I'd measure the positions between the holds. I didn't actually do that with Alphane. I didn't really intend on setting a replica originally, but I got quite into it. Like just the concept of it. It's really fun.
How would you do that? Like what tools are you using to do
that? So I use a measuring tape because I don't entirely trust it, but you can do that on phones these days. You can like kind of use like a measuring app and like measure between the holds. Or the way I actually scan the holds of Burden of Dreams, I used an app called Polycam, which you can like LiDAR the whole boulder, and that's got a measuring tool. But I was a bit skeptical of it, so I measured it independently of that. But it actually was about right. So I eat my hat. Technology's not so bad these days. So I would like, usually that's how I'd approach a like the distances between the holds are obviously like kind of the place to start. I'd make sure the holds feel similar, but like the feeling of the moves, that's all pretty guessworky. Essentially the thing I really focus on is like trying moves a lot. Hard moves, you often fall off them. And like, I kind of like really began to understand what the things that go wrong, what were the things that would go wrong, or what would be generally the theme of things which would like inhibit me doing that move. And so I try and recreate that in the moves that I set. So generally it's like a lot of like setting it, tweaking it, setting it, tweaking it. Like, and I actually, it didn't take too many tweaks to do this one. Maybe I'm getting a bit better at setting replicas these days, but it's a lot of experimentation. And I actually think there's value in. So I've got the main replica which I climb on, which like has the specific carved holds and feels like the most applicable, or like the things that like it feels the most applicable to the climb. But then I have like 3 options for every hand basically. And like the same 3 options for every feet. So I will do like the main, like mostly work on the main one, but then like I'll try all the different little variations as well, which don't feel quite the same. But I basically like, I don't want to get really specifically recruited at my replica, which is very similar, but not exactly the same. I think it's quite good to like be quite well trained in like all the slight variations of it as well. So I kind of like definitely experiment a bit, but it was a lot of like tweaking. And so an example of like the move, it'll be hard to describe where it is in the sequence, but there's basically one section on Alphane where most people who were trying it were kind of, you get like a big open, like rounded slot with your left hand. And most people here were like kind of cutting and like moving their feet to the left, and then matching into a crimp next to their left hand, and then moving their feet back to the right, and then going up again. And at this point here, I actually don't move my feet to the left at all. I keep my feet on the right and like extend straight up. So I don't use the intermediate. I extend straight up to like this, which is this weird split crimp with the lower index and the back 3 I was talking about. And basically what that does is it reduces a bunch of foot moves. It's a bit quicker, but it suits me way better in that like I basically hold the open-handed slot with 4 fingers slightly flexed, and I like keep weight in a foot far away, which like, and I go I go pretty statically. It's like a lock for me. And it's like a thing that definitely suits me quite well. But like there are like certain details of that. Like I know that I place my right foot, I draw my left foot into an undercut, and then I always readjust my right foot and slightly turn my like right knee inwards. And basically I just played around with this replica and the foothold that I was using until like that felt like the only way that I could do the move. And then I knew that was kind of like good enough to be like training the right stuff.
Yeah.
But in terms of like how I've prepared for Alphane in general, it's actually like the thing that's most general like strength muscle group that I've trained to be specific for is actually mostly in the legs. I use my adductors loads on it, which I mean legs are really underrated in climbing actually. I use my legs loads when I'm climbing, but the way I definitely climb it is a lot of compression with my legs. And so I have been doing quite a bit of specific training for that, which has felt quite helpful. We'll see how it goes.
Is that on the wall? Is that making up movements that kind of simulate that leg squeezing on the wall, or with supplemental exercises as well?
Supplemental exercise as well. So Ollie kind of does, Ollie Torr sets my training plan. And we usually like are quite experimental with the sessions we will have, and we'll like trial periods, and I'll like kind of feedback what works well. And one of the things which did feel quite useful was I don't know if you know of do you know what a Copenhagen plank is?
No, Copenhagen plank. I've never heard of that.
It's essentially like a side plank. So say if your right elbow was on the floor and you're doing a side plank, but your feet were on a chair. If your right elbow was down, your left toe would be on the chair, but your right toe would be hanging underneath. So you're essentially like the difficulty is holding your legs together.
Okay.
I will essentially do, so that's on a chair. I'll actually do that on a climbing wall with my foot on a foothold, so that my ankle becomes like an extra, like it's like an extra point to fail. And so like your calves are really like engaged, and like I will vary like my knee length. It's quite a funky exercise, but I find that would like really like hammer my adductors, and felt like it gives me a lot more stability when I'm like compressing with my legs anyway.
Wow, that's so cool, man. I've never even thought to do anything like that, but it makes perfect sense. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of I quite like this kind of like I think this is something that I would never have quite gotten in competitions. Obviously, like you do. I mean, I'm friends with a few competitors, and it's crazy the amount of volume they do. But like this level of specificity, I enjoy it. It's quite fun to be like so. Well, yeah, it requires a lot of trial and error, but yeah, it's fun to go so detailed with it. I also do another exercise I do on wall quite a lot, which I do find helpful. Is I have like just on my board, I have like a set of just like really good kind of open holds, and I'll actually just keep my hands on those and do like sequences with my feet. So that's kind of like a bit more like I'll get very extended and like kind of get like the footholds will be like kinked at angles. That's actually one thing which I think has constituted a lot of like my style, or like kind of left me contributed to why I like that style, is my board has always been like feet follow. So I'd have like set footholds at the bottom, but I always stand on my handholds, which lots of people don't like. I mean, if you go to like Ned's board or something, you won't see any rubber on the holds. It's like immaculate his board, and it's not nice to have like rubber on your handholds, but I can sleep at night. and I find it really useful. Like, and it's like because you then engage body tension in quite weird positions. It's not always just like a convenient foot wherever you want it. So I've definitely found that really helpful. But it makes my board is a bit less pretty. But I definitely find for this climb it's not really that it's lower body or upper body. It's like everything is engaged the whole time. So like I actually incorporate breaths into my sequence, just
Wow.
because it's quite hard to breathe.
Yeah.
Because you're like your body's tense the whole time, and like the transitions between the moves, like you can't relax at all. So I've done a lot of like just connections between my body to like my hands and my feet. Like I've done a lot of work to like try and maintain some control there, which has always been something I've been okay at, but I think is really helpful for this climb, especially.
That last comment's so interesting because I was watching that video this morning and watching Shawn climb the thing. And I just had the thought, like, how is he getting enough oxygen? Because you can just barely hear him taking these tiny little sips of air. You know, he's like, just these tiny little sips, you know, every third move or something. And I'm just like, damn, how is he? How is he not just like beat red in the face, you know? But
an impressive feat of lung capacities.
Yeah. But, well, and that kind of gets to another question that I had for you. And actually, this is very poignant for me right now. I have one client that I coach, and I'm trying to help him work on this boulder problem that he has this fall. And you know, shout out to Neil. I think he's got a really good shot at doing it. And he mostly trains on the tension board, and that's worked really well for him to just improve his overall strength and his movement. But this is a much longer boulder problem than you would typically have on a board like that. So we had a conversation the other day about whether it was better to try to do linked up boulder problems to try to be on the wall for a similar length of time, or rather to just do kind of these bouldering doubles where the intensity is a little bit more appropriate or a little higher, and he's just doing two boulders back to back. And when you said a replica for Alphane on your board, I mean, you have a decent sized home board, but it's Alphane. I mean, how many moves is Alphane? It looks massive.
Yeah, Alphane's a funny one. Yeah, I know what you mean. So I actually only replicated the crux, which is like basically from when you pull on to when you put in a left heel toe jam, which is like 8 moves in or something.
Okay.
It feels really long because you're under tension the whole time and it's quite slow. But the actual hard climbing isn't a crazy long boulder. I think it is like 8 moves and a foot move. So like it's not so bad to replicate. It's hard. I don't have like at the bottom of Alphane, you put in like a heel toe off a sloper to establish into an undercut, and you can't. It's really hard to set that on a board. So I don't actually have that on my replica at all. I just like I'm pulling on from like kind of establishing into the undercut. So I'm hoping that I can like relearn that when I actually get there. And likewise with the top section is about 70 plus, but felt relatively reliable. I think probably a bit harder when you're pumped. But I did it from relatively early on, actually, in trying it. I did it from 2 moves in, and like topped out.
You did the boulder from 2 moves in.
Yeah. From like the kind of the first move, you like kind of roll. It's quite an easy move into a crimp, and then it's quite like it's actually not. It's like kind of a bit of like a weird like squirmy move into the undercut, and then you walk the feet, and then you do like the hard like. So I did it from like the undercut and the crimp to the top. Yeah.
Wow. How hard was that? Is that like V16 or something? Just making that link?
Yeah, I think that would probably be. Yeah, it'd probably be around there.
Wow. Nice.
No, I think like it was funny. When I did that, I was like, oh, like the first 2 moves aren't really. They're not that bad. I was like, oh, like it'll be fine. Like it felt like I was almost there, but I think definitely the time is quite slow those first couple of moves, and you do a lot of foot moves. So I think it builds. The time catches up with you quite quickly.
Gotcha.
And it did feel like it added a lot, going from the start, as opposed to there. But yeah, no, I think essentially I just replicated like the crux section, and so hoping that the first couple of moves and like the top out, I can relearn when I'm there, and like kind of hopefully are reliable enough that they shouldn't be a limiting factor. I mean, if I can get the middle section relatively reliable, I'm in a good place. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's nice to do some of the figuring out process under the climb as well, and not in my dusty stable. But yeah, with your client, were you toying up whether to do like longer boulders which incorporate down climbing or boulder doubles? Was that your conundrum?
Yeah, exactly. And we kind of landed on doing more boulder doubles and just giving him a really good way to progress the difficulty of those by, maybe first increasing the intensity of the two boulders, but then reducing the rest time between. But I just think it's really interesting. Like it kind of goes back to some of the reading I've done and other climbing coaches have talked about in running, where, a lot of sprinters have shifted a lot of their training towards doing shorter blocks of really high intensity sprints. Like Charlie Francis training his 100-meter athletes doing sets of 40-meter sprints to just work on their top power. And they're hardly doing any 100-meter sprints until they show up for their race. So I've kind of been thinking about that in this context. Like, does it actually, like, how important is it to have some practice being on the wall for the same length of time that you're going to be on the wall for this end, versus maybe it works even better or at least as well to do what you're doing, which is just focus more kind of in the strength zone on the shorter section of the boulder that's really hard, and just not really worry about linking all 20 moves together or however many there are. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that? Do you try to do any training that's the same length of time, total time under tension that you're going to need to send this thing? Or is it just really making the pieces of it a little bit easier so you have a bigger margin, and then trusting that you're going to be able to link it all together when you send?
Yeah, I think the latter point you make is probably how I've generally approached things in the past. Like, I've usually focused a lot more on the strength side of things to the point where like it feels easier. And so I have a bit more room to work with for like, I wouldn't say myself I'm a very credible source for how to perform well on long boulders. Generally, the boulders that I have done have been quite short in the past. And so I'm relatively new to the long boulder game. But I definitely think I do actually do some boulder triples. So I do because my boulder is quite short. I do try and do some I have more recently done a few sessions where I do the boulder triples just to power out. And I haven't done it very much. And I haven't done it very much in the past. So it will be interesting to see if it does make a difference. But generally, not only just in the specifics of working on one thing, but generally that power focus has like to how I've approached climbing in a whole. Like usually I would like focus on my training until the point where like the things that I would try, I would do relatively quickly. So I'm quite new to the projecting game in general, to be honest. Like it's only really in like the past year that I've spent like more than like 3 or 4 sessions in a year on something. Like I've had climbs which like I've like tried, left, gone back to over like a series of years. But it's only recently in like the last year or so that I've like just tried something like solely. So like I'd like try it, rest, like that kind of thing. So I'm quite new to the game, so I'm not the most credible source. But I definitely think either probably work. There's definitely better people to ask about the intricacies of like the sports science behind it. I mean, it's all obviously going to be very useful to be able to operate for more moves in a row if your project's quite long. But I also think like you can get quite a lot better at these things relatively quickly when you're new to them. So like if you're like me and you haven't really done much like of that like power endurance training, a few sessions like once a week or something will probably make quite a big difference in the first instance.
Yeah.
But if you've done absolutely loads, like you'll probably get diminishing returns from it. And so it's probably not quite as important. But yeah, I'll be able to report back post Switzerland trip to see if that's made any difference.
Awesome. Excited to hear about that. All right, man. I feel like I need to check in with you again. I really appreciate your time, but I want to respect your time as well. We've been going for about 2 hours now, and I have lots of things left on my list. How are you feeling?
No, I'm doing okay. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
I can keep going.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, that's how it
again, like
works.
we've got tons of listener questions, a bunch more things we can talk about in a round two if you're up for that as well. But yeah, how about this? Let me share a few thoughts. There's a few big topics that I'd really love to spend some time on, and then we can just decide. Let me know which of these feel most interesting to you to talk about. We can go through all of them if you feel up for it, or we can just focus in on one or two of them. But yeah, things I still wanted to talk to you about in this conversation. Burden of Dreams. That's something we haven't really talked about much at all. I loved our conversation last week about it. I thought that was super interesting. So that's something we could spend some time on. Goals and goal setting and hearing about your dad, I think would be really interesting, how you think about that. And then I also want to make sure that we have time for some of your thoughts around environmentalism. I know that's really important to you, and you think a lot about travel considerations. I think that's really interesting. As a pro climber, someone who wants to travel the world and test yourself on some of the hardest things out there, I'd love to hear how you balance that with, having a low carbon footprint and being a good steward, because you very clearly put a lot of thought into that and have some really interesting thoughts there. So, yeah, what do you think? Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm happy to give them a go. It feels like attainable. We can.
Okay.
It feels if you're happy to, yeah.
I'd love it.
Content to
I
try
can
and
do
crack
this
on.
all. I can do this all day.
Yeah.
I'm having
No,
fun.
we'll try. We'll try. Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll try cover all of those.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to stick on like the climbing specific and go Burden of Dreams, or more like general approach and go goal setting first?
Let's go Burden of Dreams next, because I got a lot of questions for you about that. And a lot of people, I think, have seen your wedge video that came out recently, you training on your board
Yeah.
and you climbing on the replica. And you just talked about using that app on your phone to scan the holds, and you actually had someone make replica holds for you to train on. So I think that'd be really interesting to hear about. And I was curious about it in the context of this, again, like what we talked about at the start of the conversation, how you think about being a specialist. You and I had a conversation about mastery as a concept. I thought that was super interesting. And you kind of made this distinction between doing things that are difficult for you, which could be, it could be any number of things. It could be a slopey font climb that's not, V16 because you don't train in that style as often, versus mastery, where you sound like you're a lot more interested in just trying to become a master at this thing that you're very good at and that you enjoy in climbing, which is the style that you've been talking about. Yeah. So anyway, that conversation, and then how you think about specializing and doubling down on your strengths versus working on your weaknesses. I thought the story you told me about what you learned when you went and tried Burden of Dreams was super interesting, because it kind of connects those pieces. So,
Yeah.
do you want to just start by telling me how this first became a goal for you, or your first trip to go check it out, and what came out of that?
Yeah. No. Absolutely. Yeah. So, Burden of Dreams. I think I was initially quite motivated to try it because I'd had like a spell of climbing just around the UK, and I'd done a lot of like the projects which I had around my home, and I'd gone and traveled to some stuff around the UK which I'd done relatively quickly. And I mean, I know there's really hard climbing in the UK which I haven't done, and stuff to be found which will really push me. But it had been a couple of years since I'd traveled abroad and climbed, and I'd almost felt like I'd lost my bearing. Most of the hard climbing I was doing around that time was stuff that I was developing, and so I was a bit uncertain, like, about where I was in relation to like the sport in general. And Burden of Dreams was like, I was also looking. Okay, yeah, 2 points. Burden of Dreams, in many ways, is like kind of like was new ground for bouldering, and it kind of like captured quite a lot of mystique about like a new level in climbing. And I think it kind of did it in such like a pure style of like there was no tricks. Like it's just like there's no avoiding like this like a single set of like slick small edges on 45-degree granite face. And so that was like a proper allure to me. What's the other point I was making?
I don't mean to derail you, but do you mind if I jump in and add more context for people listening? Because I do this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I make this mistake a lot. I just talk about these things, just assuming that everyone knows what they are, which maybe they do, maybe they don't. But for people listening, Burden of Dreams was the first proposed V17 in the world, first ascent by Lahaie several years ago now. And it was featured in a film called The Lapnor Project, which is like a 30-minute film, really well done. And it was Nolly's, home project in Finland, and he put like 6 seasons into it or something, like 80 plus days, and sent the thing, and it just looks like an outdoor board climb. It's just like a 5 or 6 move, just pure sort of boulder problem on this overhanging face, and it just looks insanely hard. So anyway.
Yeah. And it's kind of like got like a rare simplicity to it as well, which is, yes, fun, like strangely quite alluring. But alongside that, and like kind of like the significance of this boulder within climbing, I think at the time as well, I was like, I also just like made the full decision to like kind of step away from competitions. And I think a big part of that is goal setting's always been really important to me. And it's kind of like the act of setting a goal within competitions is relatively easy in that it's so measurable. You have a specific date of this competition and you have a number at the end of that day, and you want it to be as low as possible, and that's your rank. And like you can like create a cutoff point where like this is ambitious, but like this is what I'm going for. Whereas outdoors, like I'd found for a little while, like I was like, oh, I'm really motivated to try this. This looks great. Like I'll try all these things. I want to do this project. But like I was like lacking the structure of that like ambitious goal. Like I've always liked having goals which are like very ambitious. Like I've always found that's like really driven me. And so in search of like an ambitious goal, this was like the very obvious choice. Like it was like kind of at the time definitely the hardest boulder in the world, and I was like so intrigued by it that I kind of like set that as my goal. And I think part of me, because all I had to go off really was that video. I didn't know anyone who tried it, and I've never met Lahaie, so I kind of only had that video to go off. And I think part of me at the time, it looks like it is small holds, like on a board, which usually suits me quite well. And I mean, they are small holds, and it is basically a board. I think on a discussion of styles, it suited me a lot less well than I think I expected it would. So essentially, the mechanics behind that is the rock is really slick. The holes aren't that in cut. And so basically what that means is because the holes are like kind of flat or slopey and it's slippy rock, like you can't really rely on any generating any force outwards from the rock. You rely on like compression between these like slick edges. And so to do the moves, like the first move and the last move are like the obvious hard moves. You've got to move so quickly. Like you've got to be able to like generate force really powerfully to like get into a position which isn't, once you're in the positions, they're not that hard to hold, like they're hard, but like you're like relatively stable in that position, and you're relatively unstable in the position you generate from. You've just got to move lightning quick between them. And Nally's really good at that. Now that I've gone and tried that boulder and looked at that video back, like I can see how like dynamically moves between those positions. Like he's amazing at that kind of style of climbing. And I've always relied on going quite slow, kind of creating control and stability in those positions. And the feet are just too bad and the holes are too slopey and slick to be able to do that. So you do have to just like move so quickly and like kind of snap between these positions. And so that was something that was hard enough that really kind of emphasized that gap in my climbing. And like, it's funny to watch me, like I watch clips of me trying it and I'm like, wow, I'm like so sluggish on that move. Like, you know, kind of looks like I'm kind of like, because I know I can hold the positions quite comfortably. I'm like, oh, can't you just do it? Like, I just willing my like arm to move quicker. But anyway, yeah, it's kind of like, in many ways, it was like, obviously I wanted to be able to do well on it, or like maybe better than I did, but it was quite exciting. Like, it feels possible for me in that like the positions feel comfortable, and like the middle section I was quite reliable on. But like it just feels like I have to do that climb. It feels like I have to be a better climber. And I've spoken loads about like understanding what style you enjoy and like kind of like what you're good at. And like, I know that that's not what I'm good at, but like, it's kind of like something which is really ambitious, really challenges me. And like, I have to adapt, which kind of like a different challenge in itself. Like one day I'd love to find a climb that suits me really well, or like almost perfectly, and find a bit of rock, which like suits that style, and like takes me a really long time to be able to do it in my perfect style. And I think that's like, we had that discussion of difficulty and mastery. Like, so I recently did a podcast with Hazel Finley, and we discussed a lot about this. She actually pitched me the question of mastery, and that's really what got me thinking about it. And I kind of feel like in many ways, because it's kind of so subjective, the idea of mastery within climbing, my kind of perspective on it was, I felt like it was like something which like is like kind of quite a collaborative thing, in that like, because no one person, like some people might say mastery is to be able to walk up to any bit of rock and be able to climb it, like whether you're in Font or whether you're in Switzerland or whether you're in the Lake District or whether you're in Wyoming, like you can just, or Yosemite, you can just climb any bit of rock. Some people might be like, to be as close to the physical like limits of human capabilities in a certain style, you might look at like Burden of Dreams, but I don't think we've really have had anything that close to the limits of human potential in climbing yet. But it might just be like something which is like something which somebody really excels in. Like it's like a little contribution towards mastery, but like, because it's like such a subjective definition, it feels like it's a work of like a collective, this like concept of mastery. And so I feel like for me, like that's a way which we like can contribute to that, like to find the things that we're good at, like to find the bits of rock which kind of like allows us to kind of not display it. That sounds quite performancy, but like it, like those bits of rock then stand as like a bit of like a measure of like the kind of level in that style, which like, I don't know, I've been like really inspired by that in my climbing, like seeing all the things. But lots of like, it's cool actually, like lots of like the mellow crew which I got to meet I'd met Daniel before, but like I hadn't met Dave before. It's cool, like when I was growing up, I was like so inspired by those guys. And it's quite, they're all like Dave, Daniel, and Shawn are all like obvious like age gaps, and like, I mean, they've actually all been at the top of the game for like years, but it's quite cool to see how like they all climb together anyway. But like, anyway, I feel like for me, they've always like contributed quite a lot to like mastery in certain places in the world or certain aspects of bouldering. I don't know, I found that really inspiring myself. So I feel like, yeah, I'd love to be able to find a bit of rock one day, which like is really ambitious and suits me perfectly. And it feels like I could maybe make some contributions to that concept, but it's kind of like a completely different like challenge. And I really enjoy being challenged, and being challenged in like a climbing context, because I kind of like love the feeling of climbing anyway. This is kind of like a very new, like different kind of avenue of climbing, in trying to like fit into or trying to relate to something that somebody else has been really good at. So like Lahaie with Burden of Dreams, it's like I've found like I've got to like try and relate to that feeling myself. And I don't know, I feel like I have a long way to go, but it's quite exciting. It's quite like novel way of moving for me, and I'm quite looking forward to like training in that style a bit more. Frustratingly, with my people that might have seen that replica training video that I did with my friend Sam, who's the guy who runs Wedge, but I haven't really been able to actually train on it that much. So I set it up in the middle of summer, which is, so it's way too warm, and it's pretty skin intensive to climb, and those are pretty slick holds. I think that replica might be a little bit harder even than the real thing, but just the texture of them, and I also I think I like slightly on the steeper side, and so it is kind of it's 45, but it's kind of like 45.6 or something. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't making an easier version, but
yeah,
I overcooked it slightly. but I haven't really been able to train on it that much anyway. I picked up a finger injury as well, which kind of stopped me. But this winter, my hope is to be able to do a bunch more on it, and I don't really feel a rush, which is quite nice.
Nice.
Like, I'm aware I'm quite young, I've got a lot of time, and I'm aware that boulder's not going anywhere. So I don't feel the time pressure so much. I think like it's kind of a weird thing. Like, I feel fortunate in that I'm usually always like motivated enough within climbing I have like this drive for like self-development. I haven't quite understood it yet, but I've always been motivated to want to train and better myself. And so like, I'm not too concerned that by not having like a time on like, not like putting a date on when I want to do stuff, that I'm not like falling behind or slacking or taking my eye off the ball. I usually find it having specific goals gives me some form of direction, but I would probably be doing a lot of training and trying to be better, even if I didn't have specific things that I was trying to do. It would probably just feel a bit more meaningless, even if the meaning I derive is from climbing up a bit of rock, but we won't get so philosophical.
Well, that's cool though. I mean, like that was kind of I think I had heard from Tom Herbert initially that you were planning to go try that thing. And of course that was so exciting because, there's maybe 3 or 4 proposed V17s now in the world, but none of them have been repeated yet. So the thought of you going and trying and potentially repeating Burden of Dreams is that's big news. That's really cool in climbing. And so, yeah, super interesting to hear that it, because it's a board style on crimps, you expected it to fit you really well. It doesn't fit you quite as well as you hoped, but it sounds like it's still very much a priority for you. It's like at the top of the list.
Yeah, no, in terms of like more I'm pretty happy to be transparent about it. I'm really keen. I'm going out to Switzerland next week, and I'm really looking forward to that. But my hope is once I'm back, which will be like mid-November or something, my plan is kind of to try and train effectively on that replica over the winter, to get to a point where I feel like I'd have. But I probably would, because I've got the replica, it's kind of good. It's a long way for me to travel. And so in order to like kind of respect that, I can like kind of, the replica is helpful in that it will mean that I probably will only do that journey when I'm relatively confident that I have like all the tools to do that boulder. So I think like it's going to be really useful in that sense. But my hope is to be able to train over the winter, and should things go well, it's hard to like predict my progression on it, but should things go well, to then in spring go back out to Finland and go and try that thing. So
nice.
Yeah, we'll see.
What does that mean to you? Do you feel like you have to send the replica before going, or is it just more go by feel, like just having a sensation of feeling confident on each of the sections of it? Like, what is it going to take for you to feel like, okay, I'm ready to go back to Finland to try this thing?
To be honest, just doing the moves on that one would probably be enough. Like,
okay.
It really does feel hard. I think it does feel a bit harder. So if I could do the moves on it, that would probably be a pretty good indication. Maybe the reliability of the last move as well would be quite important to me. the first move, it's kind of okay if that's not reliable because it's the first move. But if you drop in the last move, 9 times out of 10, it's not encouraging from the start.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So yeah, in terms of time, yeah, probably would be having the last move reliable, and maybe being able to do it from one move in would be a good measure for me that I'd have a decent shot.
I have a note in front of me. You mentioned that you have a finger injury, so you haven't been able to train on it too much. I just have a note in front of me that says stabbing his hand with screwdriver with a bunch of question marks. And I don't really remember. Somehow I've managed to forget what we talked about there, but does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, that was actually an unfortunate. Yeah, to be fair, actually, I didn't actually go out to Finland in that good of form. It would have been nice to try it when I was feeling like I was firing on all cylinders. But yeah, I wasn't actually in particularly good form kind of the whole of 2021, really. I wasn't like going super well. I wasn't in the greatest place, like just like in my life anyway. And so I was like a little bit like questioning a lot of things. And I don't know if that's in some part like filtered into my climbing anyway. I wasn't properly in it. I wasn't properly loving it to the same degree that I have over this past year. But then, yeah, like I think it was less than 2 weeks before I went out to Finland. It will have been like 10 days or something. I think I had like 2 sessions after it before I drove out. I was doing some work on my van, and it was wet classically in autumn in the lakes. And I was kind of rushing a bit, and I just had a flathead screwdriver, which I ended up like spearing it into my hand. And I was actually quite lucky. I like missed my index flexor, went in between my index flexor and like the main meat of my like thumb muscle. I was quite fortunate. And so I could still like use my index. I just couldn't like the movement of touching my pinky to my thumb. I couldn't really do. So that made me, because of that, I had some stitches in there. I couldn't snatch holds as much even with my left hand, so I had to be like a little bit more controlled even. So that was really suboptimal prep. So right now I'm being very careful with the flathead screwdrivers. But no, that was just another layer of complication. I'd almost forgotten about it actually, but it's quite a funny little detail in the story.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad. It sounds like it could have easily been a lot worse, so I'm glad that you've been able to make a recovery from that.
Yeah, no, I did all right. It was relatively short term. A flesh wound.
And then I want to ask briefly before we move on, just if you could share your thoughts on replicas. I heard you say something interesting. I think it was in that wedge video when you were showing the viewers the replica of Burden. And I'll link to that video. You guys should definitely watch it if you're interested in this. Super cool to see the shapes of the holds and things. But yeah, you mentioned kind of like a light bulb moment that you had training on your board and noticing how much easier climbs got when you just were climbing on them all the time. And that kind of led you to this shift in philosophy and really focusing on replicas. But can you talk me through that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, I definitely, it's quite a fun like jigsaw puzzle as well. Just the act of setting a replica and having it like, I don't know, there's something quite fun about like trying to capture a bit of that, like kind of the climbs on the rocks and like trying to like bring a little bit of them home and kind of like have that familiarity. I think like in terms of like the difference I've really noticed, I set a replica of a climb, a project I'd been trying in North Wales called Isles of Wonder, and it was kind of the sit start to this project, and it's like incredibly shouldery. It's the one I managed to do it this summer.
V16,
and it's like yeah
nice.
V16. I think I thought at the time maybe it was the hardest thing I've done to date, but it's also one of the best, so that's something I was definitely I was pretty chuffed with that one. But I found training on this replica for that was really helpful in that it's like brutally like isolates your shoulder, your right shoulder, this like the crux sequence of the bottom section. And I hadn't done the move when I tried it the year before. And what I was finding is I'd have like 4 goes on the move, and then I'd feel like my shoulder was like cooked. Like I had a few sessions a year before, and I'd have like 4 or 5 goes, and I'd be like, right, that's my session over. And it's like a 40-minute walk, so up a steep hill. So like it's like kind of like you want to make your attempts count. And I'd like have a session on it, and then I'd have like 3 days of intense DOMs in my shoulder. Like I like couldn't function properly. And so anyway, like I set this replica which like isolates your shoulder in a similar manner. And I actually didn't even have that many sessions on it. I had maybe like 4 sessions where I'd try it like not loads of times, but like a few times in that session, enough to like kind of induce a few of those, like that muscle soreness. But it took like over a period of like 2 or 3 weeks. I just had like, maybe like a handful of like half sessions on it. And by the time I got to that climb, like everything was recruited enough in the position that I could have like, I didn't even get like DOMs at all the following days. Like I was just like, it didn't take me very long to recruit into like the brutality of that like specific position, which is like very like niche. And like I just had kind of, it really opened up my eyes to like how valuable it can be in terms of like preparing you for something where you don't necessarily want like just like your muscle to be like the limiting factor. You want like it's kind of like another thing you can control. So like being recruited into those, especially such like alien positions, felt really helpful. And I also felt like over the years I'd created so many. I don't change my board that often. Like I'll tweak little bits, but there's problems I've got on that board which were like projects or like things which used to be projects, and they've been on there for like 6 years or something. And I've still like kind of kept those, and I was kind of like, these are problems which I know so well now, and they're probably really hard, and like I've learned them, and they're so natural for me, and I've put like so much time into these things, but I could be doing that on things which like I could set a replica of something outside which I haven't done, and like and the moves are often like pretty interesting as well, like so I can have that level of specificity and learn like kind of something vaguely similar on a replica as opposed to that. And so I kind of really back the replica setting kind of stuff. It's felt really helpful for me, and I also just really enjoy it. It's fun.
And how do you think about being so specific with your training where you're spending a lot, like let's take this winter when you're going to spend a lot of time on the Burden of Dreams replica. How do you think about balancing that focus and specificity with making sure that you're not going to get injured because you're overdoing it on a very specific set of moves, if that makes sense? Like that's something that would be probably concerning to me if I was thinking about just hammering a certain boulder problem in training. Yeah. How do you think about that?
Yeah. So like, I say like I do a lot of work on replicas. Like I don't solely climb, like times when I have climbed on a replica, I wouldn't have all my sessions like that. I'd usually have it varied, but like I'd have some consistency. So like I'd try and do like once a week or something. But I wouldn't just be like day on, day off, just like on the replica.
Gotcha. Okay.
So I like maintain some like training structure. I found that has helped. I also found like setting your own, you have like the opportunity to comfortize the things which can be like feel tweaky, or like the things which feel risky or uncomfortable. Like you can kind of make slightly friendlier versions which you can like kind of practice the movements on bigger holds, or like slightly more comfortable holds, or whatever. And I found that's quite helpful. So like the movement is familiar, but the kind of like maybe brutality of them isn't always the same. You know, if that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. That's great, man. Anything else that we should talk about with Burden before we move on?
No, I think that's covered covered many bases.
Okay. You wrote an article about it. I'll be where is that for people? I'll be sure to share it in the show notes.
The one I originally wrote on it, so I'll have to find it. I think it's on. I used to be sponsored by my friend Louis' company called Catalyst Climbing, and I think it's on that. But maybe I can send you the link after this.
Okay.
And I wrote it's basically a blog article, which I wrote about that. But yeah, no, it was a fun process. I'm looking forward to continuing it when I'm back.
Nice. Awesome. Okay, let's talk more about goals in general. I thought this was really interesting. So you and I had a conversation about goals and goal setting, and I just love for you to tell me about your dad as the management consultant and how that has played into your thinking about goals and how you set goals.
Yeah, so kind of in everything I've done growing up, my dad he's been like really supportive and has been really encouraged us to be quite specific. So if there was something that we really wanted to do, rather than just being like, oh, nice, like kind of like, I'll support you in doing that, would be like, try and make it explicit enough. So like, it was like, generally what would happen is I'd have an idea of something I want to do, and we'd get out like a massive piece of flip chart paper, and we'd kind of always like apply the same formula, which I still kind of use today, really, of like, well, it would be result, reality, and response. So we'd start at like kind of really like what success looked like for us, like kind of, yeah, where I really wanted to be. And kind of, we'd done this in like an academic, like I'd done it throughout my studies and then in climbing as well. It was kind of just in anything in general, but climbing ones were quite regular. We do a few of those. We kind of really lay out something quite measurable or something, very precise anyway. And then we'd analyze where I currently was, whether that be like the boardroom that I set up was like as a result of one of these flip chart papers. It was like, currently I can like kind of go to a climbing wall 3 times a week, and that's not enough basically. So like, then we like discuss the response to like try and bridge a gap between our reality and the result we were looking to get. And then there was always something quite like practical to do. So that kind of like precise goal setting is something that I've been quite familiar with since like from quite a young age. So I've kind of like always taken that formula and like kind of, I still do it at the moment, really. And it's felt really helpful. It's definitely been different stepping away from competitions, but there's definitely the time element is not a limiting factor so much. So I'm still like kind of a bit unsure. I don't want to be like, I want to do this board by this date, because in many ways I look at it and I'm like, oh, it doesn't really matter. Like, I don't want to like rush. Like, I don't want to rush beyond what I'm naturally or quite organically motivated for. So it is kind of like a bit of complexity to it, but generally that like structure has maintained consistent.
That's awesome. So you start with looking at the result. This is what I want to do. Then you look at the reality. This is where I'm at now. And then the response is like, how do we get from here to there?
Yeah.
We've already been talking about this a lot, but can you just apply that framework to Alphane for me and just share like how you're thinking about how you thought about that with this formula, like how you thought about first the result and then where you were and how that informed your replica and your training for it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like, there's I've definitely questioned a bit more of like a complexity to this specific or like this example in more recent years, in that like me like setting the result as being like, I want to do Alphane is like a project that's like a result. Like, I've definitely like questioned maybe why it's so important to me and not fully understood it. This like whole idea of like self-development or maybe motivation by mastery, or whatever that is anyway. I haven't fully understood exactly what that is, but just from like the goal setting, like structure, when I would say like, yeah, I want to do this climb, that would be like understand the result. I'd kind of, I guess Alphane is a funny one in that I initially tried it and wasn't expecting to project anything. So I didn't go to Switzerland knowing it even existed. I just tried it and was like, oh, like this is really fun. Like I kind of didn't, even when I started trying it for multiple sessions, I wasn't like, right, I'm going to project this. Like I was trying it because I wanted to try it. So it was kind of a bit of an anomaly in that I didn't really do any goal setting at that point. It was just like, right, I want to go try that. That's like kind of, I had quite an open trip plan for Switzerland at that time. But since getting pretty close, I was like, oh, right, like I really enjoyed the whole process. I learned so much about the projecting process trying that. And it is something that I would like to do. And so when I like was like, oh, well, I'll go back in autumn to try and finish this. I guess my specific analysis of that was what was the limiting factors for me on the climb and like kind of what were like the common things which went wrong. Lots of it is hard to deduce because lots of it is like out of your control. Like I think temperature and humidity played a big role. And so that's all a bit more of a shot in the dark. But the things which I could control, I was like, oh, like realistically, what was happening that like I have control over, what can I train now? And then like adapting, I would usually, once I'd set this kind of thing, I'd have a discussion with Ollie about it. And we'd kind of formulate a load of exercises which feel helpful, or like target those things which feel like they were limitations. And then, and then he'll incorporate that into a training plan, and we'll just kind of keep communicating if it's working well. A replica was part of that response, and it felt helpful. So, we'll see if the result comes to fruition. But nice. I actually enjoy the process of it as well. Like I set a lot of these goals, which, especially in competition days, I'd set a lot which don't come about, but I've never really felt like too adverse to the possibility of failure for them, which is quite nice.
Do you have any goals outside of climbing right now?
That's a good question. I guess like I've got things that I'd like to. I don't think I've set any like with the same framework of goals that I would like to do outside of my climbing. I feel like climbing is very much the world in which I operate at the moment. I don't know whether I always will. I just stopped my studies. Like I studied until like summer last year, and decided to go full time with this climbing gig. But within like, I guess it's kind of within the climbing world, but not my own climbing. There are like things which I would like to do or like are very important to me, but are like a lot less measurable or kind of not really like measurable. Like I've kind of like understood with becoming quite good at climbing, like there comes with it a certain amount of influence. And I kind of like have fought quite a lot. A lot of this, I think, came from a lot of discussions with my dad when I was younger as well. He's always like kind of maybe challenges a lot on like what we'd like to contribute to the world and just the things that we do. And I've like climbing's a game in which I operate. And so I do have definitely questioned a lot about like the contributions I want to make to that. And I don't necessarily know whether all of them are within climbing itself, like as in like, obviously I'm a climber, but like I'd like to hope that I can maybe inspire like helpful ways of living to people which aren't solely climbing related. Like I don't solely hope to inspire people to climb harder projects. And I mean, like that's nice because I was obviously inspired by that and I'm grateful for those who inspired me. But I'd kind of like hope that I can maybe contribute some interesting ideas outside of that as well. And I've kind of been working that like whole concept. I've been working a lot more on in recent times. I actually just started a podcast with my friend not long ago, which kind of feels like a nice way in which I can communicate ideas I have with people. I mean, I'm sure you find this a lot, like having a podcast, like ideas you feel can be like valuable to contribute to the community. Like it's a really good way of interacting. Whereas I don't feel like I've always been able to do that so well with more like fast-paced modern forms of social media, the like Instagrams and stuff. But so that's been nice. And actually more recently even I've just released a magazine that I've been working on with a couple of friends, which has been quite a big project for me actually. But that's felt really valuable in that like we're all quite like-minded, the people I've set that up with. There's two others of them, and it kind of feels like the content we've been able to produce has been like curated by quite like-minded or quite distinct values we've had. And so like kind of being a bit more considerate about that has felt like, yeah, a lot more fulfilling. So I don't really know if that's a goal. I wouldn't say that's so much a goal, but it's something that like I'm like working towards. It's very hard to measure.
That's like, awesome. Yeah, totally. I totally relate to that.
Helpful you are in the world.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I that resonates really strongly with me. I mean, I started this whole thing because there was a super geeky performance and training oriented climbing podcast that didn't exist that I wanted to listen to, but it's become such a cool opportunity and in a way a responsibility, I feel, to share different perspectives, different ideas, just broaden people's minds, open them up, and get them thinking about things that feel important to me or that feel important to my guests, and draw people in with talk about finger training, and then surprise them by talking about environmentalism and travel or whatever it is. So I think that's awesome that you're doing that, and it's cool. So I actually checked out your podcast this morning, Careless Talk. I'll be sure to link to it in the show notes. I loved your cover art. Who made that?
That was Sam. We were kind of umming and ahhing about like what serious cover art we could come up with, and that was it. Yeah. I wonder actually if you ended up listening to the earlier ones. We've since figured out a bit more of a easier audio setup.
Oh, okay.
The first couple can be
okay. I haven't. No, it sounds great. I just listened to like 15 minutes of your conversation with Dave Mason. Because he's someone I met years ago. I met him in like 2012 with Mina in Joe's Valley, and I'd love to have him on the podcast someday. So I was checking that one out, and the audio sounds good. Yeah, you guys are doing a good job. Oh, nice.
Yeah. No, it's been a fun process. Yeah, no, I like that chat with Dave. He's a good man.
But yeah, with the podcast and the magazine, maybe the magazine in particular, you said that it's this cool opportunity to work with these like-minded people that have similar values. What are some of those values? What are some of the things that you like? I have this kind of trial question that I want to start asking people, maybe in every interview, and something along the lines of like, what's something that feels really important to you that you just want people to spend more time thinking about, whether that's, that can be anything. That can be climbing related or something else. I kind of have a guess as what it might be with you, but what comes to mind for you?
No, that's actually funny you asked that. I'll get you a copy of this magazine at some point, but I actually wrote an article about it, which was kind of exactly on those lines. You were asking like what you want people to think about, and over the past few years, the thing that I've thought a lot about was the impact of traveling, or just like the impacts we have, like from an environmental perspective, the impacts we have on the world, and travel being one, which is like, I think in climbers in general, like I know I certainly was, I traveled like excessively, maybe excessively is the wrong word, but I did so much traveling, which was like, as an experience, amazing, but I just wasn't like quite aware of like, it wasn't that I wasn't quite aware of the impact. It's like I just hadn't really thought about it. Like I was so detached from it.
Right. Totally.
And I don't know if I've always communicated it too well in the past. So in this magazine, I I like tried to capture a bit of like, I guess my objective was to like try and encourage people to really consider what they look for in their climbing experiences and see how much of what they really look for they can find in their locality, and things which they can't, then to consider like the impacts of the traveling that we do, and like maybe like try and further respect that traveling. So, or like, I don't know, there's a big difference between like flying to a place for a week 4 times a year, or trying to take a month-long trip once a year or something. Like, from a travel perspective, it obviously makes a really big difference. And I mean, it's obviously, maybe that's an extreme example, not most people don't have the time for that, but it felt like for me that was something in order to feel credible to make suggestions to people's lives, it felt like I really needed to somewhat walk the walk myself. And I'm not saying that I don't, like, as a climber, I don't have that much influence over the climbing community. Like, I think I've definitely got more than I used to. And I think as I've become like more known as a climber, I've begun to realize that I'm not only responsible for my impact on the world, but also responsible for the impact of the lifestyle which I advocate. So,
oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So like, if I like fly about, so I think I notice it really well. I'll explain. Yeah, I wrote about this quite a bit, but like, I was really inspired by like some amazing climbers. And like, I'm really grateful for that. Like, this is something I've always been quite sensitive towards. I never want to appear like you guys should all be doing this. Like, it's not like some like self-righteous endeavor I'm trying to embark on. I'm like so grateful to these people which inspired me, but essentially, like, I've always looked at like videos of people climbing in Colorado or South Africa or the Grampians, and like being like, wow, that's so different and so amazing. And these people are flipping incredible. Like, they're living the life. And then I started getting better at climbing, and I started being able to function on the boulders they were doing. Then I started doing the boulders that they were doing. And then I was like, South Africa, flights are booked. Colorado, I'm going. I mean, I never went to Grampians, but I like it took like the global pandemic really for me to like stop and be like, oh, hang on a minute. Like, I was so inspired by these people, and like that kind of inspiration led me to do this lifestyle of so much traveling. And kind of, it feels like I have the opportunity here to somewhat like not break that cycle, but like, I don't necessarily know whether I want to contribute to that role myself. And I'm not saying that I inspire people to like the same level that Dave Graham or Daniel Woods do, but like, it feels like if I have influence on the world, I want to like make the contributions I can, or try to be helpful. And I think like what this is referencing to is like, I think most people can agree that throughout all of like the frustrations of like the environmental crisis, the lack of momentum of those who have a lot of influence is quite annoying. So this isn't on like the scale of like within climbers. I think it's like kind of more people who have influence over policy and all. Like, I think like the inertia of those who have the ability to bring about like genuine significant change has like somewhat inspired like really radical action of those who have like very little influence themselves, just because like it's not changing. And it might be the circles of people I spend my time with, but I see so many like really good people making massive changes to their lifestyle in order to like reduce their environmental impact. And I mean, they do it with a good heart. And Dan's a good example. Like, I mean, he probably won't speak much about it, but he got a Tesla way before it was cool. And he's just he installed a load of solar in his house recently. So it's running all off electricity, or mostly off electricity. So he's like really aware of it. And I know like I've just like a bunch of people who are like making really big changes to their lives. And like, that's really cool. And it makes a difference. But like, it's arguable whether like, I mean, you were saying at the start of the conversation, like October is the new August in terms of like temperatures. Like,
Yeah.
there's a question as to whether like it's enough at this point. And anyway, it feels to me like a load of good people end up picking up the slack for the neglect of people with far more power or far more influence. And it's like, it feels sad to me, that concept. And anyway, yeah, all of it kind of feels a bit saddening. So for me, like, I know it's like a bit like philosophical, but it felt like with me having some influence over like perhaps like the lifestyle I live and like it's somewhat influencing other people, it felt like if I had a contribution to make, it felt sad for me not to at least make the effort to do something helpful. And yeah, I mean, I feel like I found a lot more. That was like kind of the motivation of like my travel considerations. So I don't really fly anymore, or like I haven't flown in a little while. I flew in 2019, I think, last. But I've made conscious efforts to try and reduce that. And I'm not saying that everyone has to do that, obviously, but I feel like I've found like a lot more fulfillment or a lot more value in doing things locally or doing things I don't know, it feels like it's more than just like the quality of the climbing itself. There's like the experience of it as well, and just the experience of travel. I've definitely learned a lot of things perhaps I didn't necessarily know I was going to find out, but it feels like, yeah, I don't know, I feel like I've mostly said what I was going to say, but like it hasn't what I'm saying is, despite this change to my like lifestyle in terms of travel, it hasn't actually felt at all a detriment to my climbing experience, which is I think what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's ways it gets often presented as like you either live your life or you take massive devastating changes to your life and like you can't go and do your project in South Africa. So that's not what I'm saying. Like basically you can often find things you don't necessarily expect a lot closer to home. I mean, most of your listeners are probably based around places in America, but there's like amazing things there. And like, I mean, in the UK, I feel so fortunate as well. Okay, so that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, the magazine that I brought out, it's called Spotter Magazine. But that was like definitely the thought process, like which like helped define like this like very distinct value. And that was kind of like the thing that really like drew me into trying to produce something that could help convey those messages through people's stories. And then there's a few more different values which we defined as well, but has been like, for me, that was really what drew me to wanting to produce this magazine as well. And it's been a really fun process. Yeah, hopefully it can make some, or at least get some people to think.
Well, thanks, man. That was a perfect answer. I mean, my intention with this question is not to have, my guest or anybody tell anyone else what to value or what to think. It's just adding that question mark to your, in your case, to the traveling experience. And that's really perfect because, I'm already applying that to myself. Like I have for a long time thought, I always feel overwhelmed when I go to new climbing areas because I'm the type of climber that wants to check every single box in the guidebook, like I want to do everything. And so I feel really overwhelmed at the thought of traveling overseas, and I don't feel like I need to necessarily because there's so much climbing to experience here in the States. And I'm so grateful that I get to travel around in the van and be able to do that. But having said that, I'm going to sound like a total hypocrite. Like I am planning to go to Rocklands next summer, and I really think I'm really excited about that. I think there's going to be a ton of value in that cultural experience and seeing that. But you're already getting me think about like how to add that question mark of what is the impact of this trip to that equation, and maybe, I don't know, like maybe I'll look into how to offset my CO2 for that trip and calculate what the impact is going to be of that, that plane ticket to get over there.
Yeah. And it's a good example as well. Like, cause I don't want I'm not trying to suggest like that people don't travel. And obviously like these places are amazing, and like I have no doubt you'll have a flipping amazing time in Rocklands. And like I'm never going to be like, oh yeah, don't do that, because obviously like I don't want to jeopardize any like enriching experiences. And also like it's very like, I think it's nice, like you were saying, putting a question mark for people to like think, just like to have it as like awareness of like the impact that has. And maybe it will inspire people to make, have like longer or kind of like trips. Maybe they even more like just appreciate it more, to like kind of like really understand like the privilege of the travel that they've done. They can actually like admire like the distances they've traveled as well. Like it's not saying like, yeah, never travel.
Right.
Because I was, yeah. But yeah, no, it is an interesting point, and I kind of am very much aware that I can never say to people don't travel, because obviously like it's amazing too, and like I'm going to continue doing it, and my lifestyle is far from perfect. Like I travel around in my van, which is diesel, which is suboptimal, but like people are always going to travel. I think I just, like you're saying, put a question mark. People kind of like think about what you look for your climbing experience, look for in your climbing experiences, and see what you can find locally. And when you can't, just to like, make your best attempt to like respect the distances you do travel.
That's great, man. I mean, one example that popped out to me from our first conversation in talking about this, I think I'd asked you, are you going to come back to the States? You know, there's so many hard boulders here now. Even since you were here last time, there's so many things in the park, and down in Waco, I think you'd be able to just crush. It'd be really fun to see you climb here. And I think you said something along the lines of, well, I'm trying to limit my travel right now, so I would love to go back to the States, but I think I'll wait until I can just go live there for a year. And I thought that was really cool. I mean, you're still coming over here. You're still planning on experiencing a lot of the climbing here, but just, you know, rather than doing like 6 2-week trips over the next few years, kind of saving all that up and just taking one plane trip across the ocean instead of a bunch of different ones back and forth.
Yeah, I think it can be so much more immersive as well. Like the flying's quite a funny thing in that like you like get picked up in one place and just dropped in another, and kind of like you don't really connect so much with like the journey you've taken, like the changing of the scenery, and like kind of in this case, I mean like you referenced then, I would love to come to America again. There's so much I want to do out there, but yeah, I think I'd probably come and live out there for a little bit, which I think I will do over the next few years at some point. I'm kind of really looking forward to that, but I think I'll probably get a lot more out of it culturally as well, as opposed to, like you say, like quick trips where you don't really have time to think about anything but projects.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Aidan. I've been incredibly greedy with you.
Oh, no.
But I really appreciate your time, man. This has been so much fun. And for everyone listening, thank you guys for submitting so many questions. I know we covered a number of them in just the flow of conversation here. So I think what I'll do, Aidan, is I'll go through the list. I'll kind of organize it in a way that hits on the things that we didn't cover or expands on the things that we only covered briefly. And then whenever you're ready, maybe when you're back from Switzerland or when you have a rainy rest day or something, we can do another one, and we can just tackle a bunch of questions from patrons.
Yeah, that sounds perfect. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that.
All right, man.
But yeah, no, thanks so much for taking the time to chat. It's really nice to catch up.
Yeah, super fun. Really good to get to know you a little bit. And I really enjoyed this conversation. And good luck. Yeah. You're leaving in a week?
Yeah, that's the plan.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I'll keep you updated.
Okay. How long is your trip? Do you have a planned duration, or just till the weather turns?
I think it will be about 4 weeks. I think there's like basically so much out there. I think it will probably towards the end of that be too cold for Alphane, but
okay.
There's so much other stuff I'd like to try as well. So hopefully close some accounts, but looking forward to definitely opening up some new ones as well.
Nice. Awesome. Well, I was going to ask if there's any way for people to follow along with your trip, but I think by the time this comes out, you'll probably be just wrapping up. So,
okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I'll share all the things, Aidan Roberts, in the show notes at thenuggetclimbing.com. I think I've seen you on Instagram. Are you active on Instagram?
Yeah, I use Instagram. Yeah, that's my platform.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. I'll be sure to link to Aidan Roberts on Instagram and also your podcast, Careless Talk, and I'll find links to your magazine and some of the other writing that you've done as well to share for people. And for those of you who enjoyed this conversation, definitely check out some of the videos in the show notes for this episode. Check out the Alphane video and the wedge video and some of the other things that Aidan's been featured in, to watch how freaking strong this guy is on the rock and how controlled he is between those tiny crimps. It's pretty amazing to see. So, but yeah.
Thanks for having me on, Stephen.
Yeah.
It's been so nice. And I hope you get some favorable weather this afternoon.
Thanks so much. I'm going to head out there right now and give the project a try.
Oh, good luck. And I'll catch you before too long.
Okay. Sounds good, man.
Perfect.
Take care.
Speak soon.
Bye.
See ya. Bye.
Hey friends, before you go, don't forget to check out Frictitious Climbing. Head over to frictitiousclimbing.com to shop for hangboards and accessories. Use code NUGGET at checkout for free shipping. The Easy Board might be the cleverest hangboard design I've ever seen. The hangboard doorway mount is a convenient way to train in your home or apartment, so go check them out. Also, don't forget to check out Petzl. Shop for Petzl harnesses at your local climbing shop or online at petzl.com and get the comfort and performance you deserve. They make harnesses for whatever type of climbing you love to do, using 4 unique constructions to build their harnesses. Whatever it is you love, Petzl harnesses have you covered. You can experience the difference with Petzl. Also, be sure to check out the Arc'teryx film Free as Can Be. If you love climbing, especially if you love trad climbing or stories from Yosemite, I'm sure you'll love the film. Head over to YouTube, search for Arc'teryx Free as Can Be, or use the direct link right there in your podcast app to watch the full 31-minute film for free. Also, be sure to check out PhysiVantage. I take their supercharged collagen every day to support my finger training. I can't recommend it enough if you're training your fingers. Check it out. Head over to PhysiVantage.com and use code NUGGET15 at checkout. You'll save 15% off your next order. And finally, last but definitely not least, don't forget to check out Crimpd. Head over to crimpd.com or find the Crimpd app in the App Store. The free version gives you access to 75 different workouts created by professional coaches Tom Randall and Ollie Torr of Lattice Training. You heard Aidan talk about Ollie in this podcast. These guys are legit, their training programs are legit, and the app is awesome. So go check it out. You can try it for free and see if you like it. And that is it, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Aidan as much as I did. Stay tuned. He's going to come back on the show. We're going to answer all of your patron questions and do a patron Q&A and a follow-up. So stay tuned for that. Thank you guys again for listening. I hope you have an amazing week. Much love to all of you. And we will see you next time.
Like we do it.